Hey everybody, it's Aldo Gandhi, and I just want to let you know really quickly that our swag shop is reopened. DeepDishTees.com is where you go, and that's tees with T-E-E-S. Clever name, guys. They're the new home of our merchandise. You can get t-shirts, you can get caps, you can get coffee mugs, you can get hoodies, you can get all sorts of good stuff, and you'll help out the bar room with the purchase. So head over to DeepDishTees.com. The following program is a production of the Barroom Network. It is intended for all audiences.
Doug Buffone.
This defense sucks. This is moronic.
John Buffone.
Is Bill Lazor a good play caller, or is Matt Nagy such a bad play caller that it makes average look like Bill Walsh?
Doug was behind the microphone first. He never held back.
Very difficult to score when your offense is on the bench. When your defense is out there giving up 70, 80, 70, 64-yard drives.
Now, it's his nephew, John, and there's no holding this Buffone back either.
What the Bears are right now is what has been wrong with them for over 30 years. Just aim to be competitive and do your best to be average. And maybe we should just accept that, because the front office sure as hell did.
I don't mind you getting beat. I got my ass whipped many times. But I tell you, I took somebody down with me.
The games have been close because the defense, your offense, which you came in to revolutionize, has gotten worse as the years go by.
It's Buffone 55, the John Buffone Show.
Hello and welcome to the end of the year extravaganza here on Buffone 55. I'm your host, John Buffone, and alongside me is my trusty producer and co-host, Alyssa Barbieri. Alyssa, big news all week surrounding the Chicago Bears. Matt Nagy out, Ryan Pace out, George McCaskey fumbling his way through another press conference, and speculation galore about who is going to lead this franchise into the 2022 season. Are you exhausted yet?
I am. Honestly, Monday, I was just like, it felt like a roller coaster. Monday, like the joy in the morning, and then you had George McCaskey take center stage, and it all went to hell. And just keeping up with all the coaching and GM candidates, like, I mean, it is exhausting, but, hopefully this, it's hard for us to be optimistic, but if there's a time to be optimistic, it's during the off season. So I don't know, maybe something good will come of this. Maybe they'll luck their way into something.
All we can do is hope. Really, that's all we can do as fans and observers and analysts and all this other prognosticators. All we can do is hope, and maybe the Bears will get it right. But tonight, Alyssa, we are going completely off the rails. We will start like we always do because we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of tradition here on this show, but we got an excellent show to wrap up the season. We are merging and adding so much. I cannot wait to kick it off. But if this happens to be your first time listening or watching Buffone 55, you picked a hell of an episode to start on. Alyssa, can you give us a rundown on this B55 blowout?
Well, tonight we're going off the rails. Okay, we're going to start off like we always do with our B55 segment, and that's that I ask John 5 questions, and his responses must be completed within 55 seconds. The 55 is John's way of paying tribute to the great Doug Buffone, his uncle, his mentor, and a man who played 15 seasons with the Bears and wore number 55. After that, we're going to dig deep into all of the Bears talk with someone that knows the team like the back of his hand. Aaron Lemming, who covers the Bears for CBS Sports, The Bear Report, and Windy City Gridiron. After that, we're bringing the Barroom Network's The Bear Debate to Buffone 55. Tyler Gaines Ellis will be here, and he and John will duke it out over 5 debate questions with Aldo Gandia moderating. When the dust settles there, we'll welcome the host of The Bears Previa, Nasli Briones, to the show to get an international view of the Chicago Bears. But wait, there's more. Later on, we'll welcome the hosts of Draft on Tap, Danny Shimon and Neil Stopchinski, to give us an idea of what the Bears might do in the 2022 draft. Finally, we'll end the show like we always do by heading down to Buffone's basement, where John, Aldo, and I will be joined by one of the members of the Barfly Tailgate Show, and we're going to have one last Bears therapy session. So we have a long night ahead of us, John, and plenty to talk about. You ready to get this started?
Oh man, I'm exhausted already, but you know what? We gotta do what we gotta do. Let's do it.
Buckle up, here we go. So, John, the firing of Matt Nagy didn't surprise most people. However, Ryan Pace's status was much more up in the air. What was your reaction when the news hit that the Bears fired their general manager? 55 seconds are on the clock.
Well, I honestly didn't think it was going to happen. When the initial report broke about Matt Nagy being fired, I thought, they didn't announce it in tandem, so Ryan Pace must be staying. Because earlier, the news broke about Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman being fired in Minnesota, and that was announced at the same time. So I braced myself, I tried to think of a positive spin, and I figured Ryan Pace would be picking the next head coach with George and Ted. But minutes later, the bomb dropped, and Ryan wasn't promoted. He wasn't reassigned. He wasn't given another year. He was actually fired, and it really took me by surprise. The Family Diner actually fired someone despite how nice of a guy he was. So I didn't think George had that in him, although his press conference did dedicate an awkward amount of time talking about how he likes Ryan Pace. It kind of sounded like he just found out his best friend was transferring to a new high school. But nevertheless, I was pleased with the decision. Muted. You're muted, Alyssa. We're off the rails already.
Of course I was muted. Okay. So I couldn't believe not only that I was muted, but that the Bears actually fired Ryan Pace, because when I woke up and with the Vikings and how they handled it, they fired their GM first and then their head coach. So when I saw the Matt Nagy news, I was like, oh crap, we're stuck with Ryan Pace. When is this announcement coming? But it was nice to see them actually make the move McCaskey, because it needed to be done. I mean, if you look at Matt Nagy, you can't put all of the blame on his shoulders. Kind of like, remember when he fired his coordinators back after that 2019 season? You can't put the blame all on one person or, those people when they both, contributed to the downfall of this team. So, I mean, it was something that it had to happen. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little shocked that it actually did. And it's exactly what needed to happen, and we'll see what happens now during this coaching and GM search. Because I don't know, could we be worse off without them? Like, after watching McCaskey, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm relieved that it happened, because I'm a big proponent of having the GM and the head coach line up, because I didn't want the new head coach to come in and all of a sudden Justin Fields is taking the next step and he looks great, but the team still isn't constructed well enough to compete in the playoffs. And so you're going to maybe fire Ryan Pace and keep the new head coach and then hamstring a new GM by saying, hey, that's your head coach. So I didn't like that they were maybe going to stagger that like that. So the fact that they're going to have a new GM and a new head coach to really usher in a new era, I'm a big supporter of that.
Yeah, and that was probably one of the only good things that George McCaskey did, because like you said, the Bears seemingly gained a lot of goodwill after Pace and Nagy were both fired. However, when George McCaskey, stepped up there, he siphoned most of that goodwill away after his press conference on Monday. So, John, I'm curious, what did you make of the chairman's press conference? The clock starts now.
It was a PR nightmare. From starting off with chastising the fans, to not disclosing whether the new GM needs to be on board with Justin Fields, to the Olin Kreutz stuff, to openly admitting that he is just a fan, but asking all other Chicago Bears fans to trust his business model. All that goodwill, like you said, they gained by firing Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, was vaporized and burned up in the atmosphere. Then throw in the fact that George had to go out of his way to defend Ted Phillips while he kind of just idly stood by and listened to the Chicago media rip him. It was basically the same song and dance we heard before Pace and Nagy came to Chicago, and it was even similar to last year when they decided to retain that dynamic duo. He really does have a way of saying the exact wrong thing at the exact wrong time, and we can't even give him the benefit of the doubt because we have nothing positive in history to fall back on.
After that press conference last year, and remember, that was just terrible. It was a disaster, and I really didn't think it, this year would be worse or even on the same level, but I think we can agree it was at least on the same level as last year. It was just a complete disaster. Like you said, the way that he started off by, taking Jeff Dickerson's grieving son and then using that to transition into Matt Nagy, and then how people were booing him. Like, that was just from the start, I was like, oh gosh, this is a disaster. It's just going to be just terrible. And like you said, he got up there and he just didn't know what he was doing. And this is the guy that is going to pick our new GM and head coach, and he's the one running this football team. And it's just, I mean, we knew, because we've talked about it a lot on the show, that, while Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are part of the problem, I think the bigger problem, we could agree, is ownership in the front office. So, I mean, it was just, it's like I did a whole embarrassing moments article on Bears Wire, because I just like, there's too much going on. It wasn't just like one or two or three. I did like 10 or 11, but there was way more than that. It was
I'm sure you had to whittle it down.
I had to whittle it. It was just absolutely ridiculous. I just, because like on Monday morning, you after they fire Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, you're like, oh my goodness. It was like we were optimistic for like half a morning, and then George McCaskey came and just ripped that away, and that was just the worst part. I think it's like he wanted to take all the hope that Bears fans were feeling, which wasn't a lot, and he just took it from us.
Yeah, it was really, really bad last year, but it was bad it was just bad in a different way this year, I guess. It was still bad. It's just like a new way of being bad. And you just kind of wonder, like, that you have the fans on your side, at least for the day, because you made the change that everybody wanted to see, and you still found a way to just completely, T-bone it. And I don't know how he does it. It's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, he keeps one-upping himself. So, I mean, I hope we'll see what happens after this year. But, I mean, I don't know. How could it get worse next year? But I feel like, George will find a way.
He'll find a way.
He'll find a way. And speaking of that press conference, one of those embarrassing moments where things got a little bit awkward was when George McCaskey was asked about a story that former Bears center Olin Kreutz had told recently about being approached to be an offensive line assistant for $15 an hour. And McCaskey said he has learned to take everything that Olin says, quote, with a grain of salt. What are your thoughts on how McCaskey handled that exchange? 55 seconds.
See, this almost seemed predetermined to me. Like George thought about what he was going to say if he was asked this question, and this is what he decided to go with. The reason I say this is because he was so tight-lipped about everything else. He absolutely would not say a word about if the new GM had to have Justin Fields in his future plans. Even though it's quite obvious that the new GM and head coach should be on board with Justin Fields, George would not address it at all. But when asked about Olin Kreutz's story, that's when George decides to go maverick and clap back. So here's the thing. Perception is everything. Even if the story was false or fake or whatever, taking a public shot at a beloved former Bear while you, the chairman of the Chicago Bears, aren't exactly the most popular guy in the room is a bad look. You could have easily given one of your stale non-answers like, Owen was a great player for this franchise and I have the utmost respect for him and the passion he still has for the Bears today. Is that a lame answer? Yeah, but is it going to get you roasted by Olin for the next 2 weeks? Probably not.
All he had to do was say, I'm not going to talk about that. I don't, we'll talk about it off camera or, whatnot. Just kind of dismiss it. And like you said, he took a targeted shot at Olin. And that's not a way. You're not helping relationships between former players and the Bears front office, which we know that things have been between some former players, especially in the media with the Bears. I mean, that things are, a little tense. So, I mean, that's not going to help matters. I mean, he already looked like a bumbling buffoon, obviously talking about George McCaskey. And then he just took a shot like that. I was shocked. That was one of those mouth drop moments. And I was like, did he actually say that? Of all of the things that he said, I mean, because there was a lot, like I said, a lot of embarrassing moments, but that was just downright just cruel. And how dare you basically call Olin Kreutz a liar? And then obviously he kind of deserves what Olin coming after him. Just saying. I mean, George McCaskey deserves a lot of criticism, but he definitely earned that one too.
There needs to be a media prep team, and there needs to be someone that isn't afraid to say no to George McCaskey, to say, hey, you can't say this because you know what's going to happen if you do. But that apparently in the last 2 years they have not learned their lesson in that. So we'll just continue to watch. We'll just continue to watch that dumpster fire.
Yeah, like you said, the media prep. I mean, the opening, he was reading it on a piece of paper, and he's who okayed that? Who thought that was a good intro? It's just a lot of questions. I mean, there's a lot wrong with the Bears, and that's even the media relations. Right. It's just a mess. So John, so as soon as the news broke that Matt Nagy wouldn't be returning, the rumor mill started spinning, and names were being tossed into the ring as to who would be the head coach of the Bears in 2022. So John, now is your turn. Is there a name or a type of coach that you'd like to see the Bears zero in on in the coming weeks? The clock starts when you do.
Look, I've been saying all along that the most important attribute the new coach needs to have is to be a good leader of men. They don't need a buddy that's going to make it fun to play football. They don't need a guru or a revolutionary to change the way we think about offense. They need a guy that can command the room, a guy that when he speaks, people listen, a genuine leader that understands what it takes to be a head coach. And I don't think it necessarily has to be an offensive guy. I always use Mike Tomlin and Bill Belichick and Mike Vrabel as examples. When they talk, their players and everyone else take notice. And quite frankly, I think they need someone who's a little abrasive at times to break up the fun, happy culture that doesn't hold anyone accountable. That's why I was warming up to the idea of Jim Harbaugh, but I feel like he's leveraging this whole thing into a massive contract with Michigan, so it's not going to work out there. But they need to get someone who won't fit in nicely to this family diner model that the Chicago Bears have been installing for the last century.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we saw Matt Nagy, right? He was this, happy, fun guy, and he wasn't really overly strict. And I mean, that's what the Bears need, I think, at this point. And we've talked a lot about this. And, in terms of what kind of head coach do they need, I don't, whether it's offensive, defensive, whatever, get, like you said, that leader in the locker room and someone that's going to be able to hire the right coaches and put his players in a position to succeed, which is something that the Bears haven't had for a while. I mean, one of the few good things that George McCaskey said during this disaster of a press conference was that, they weren't going to they were going to exhaust, their search. They weren't just going to focus on an offensive guru or a defensive guy. And even before, there were reports that they were going to look for a leader of men type. So, I mean, that's exactly what they need to do. Do I trust them to make the right choice? And that's a completely different question.
Yeah, I'm never going to trust them. And quite frankly, I think George said this as well. He's not going to earn the trust. He's not going to get lauded by the fans today, tomorrow, or even within the next month or so, even after the hires, because Bears fans are past that point. We need results to actually be gracious. We need results to say that was the right decision. You're not going to gain back the fans by just making one or two moves. There needs to be results at some point. And I think that's what the new regime has to mandate: tangible goals that you can actually see a finish line and get there, rather than just saying a subjective term like progress or improvement, where that could literally be anything. So I think that's going to be a big hurdle to overcome.
I mean, John, you and I, during our time being Bears fans, we haven't seen that yet. So I hope that there is change coming. Never. But again, it's really hard to have any kind of faith in this organization right now. But we're going to finish on this. It's difficult to be overly hopeful if you're a Bears fan, regardless of what happens in the short term with the GM and the head coach hirings. So, John, put on your ambassador hat and speak on behalf of Bears fans to put a bow on the 2021 season. We're shutting off the clock for this one. The floor is yours.
Well, another season has come and gone. Unfortunately, the fear we had after the 2020 season came to fruition in 2021. We were afraid this would be a lame duck year for the head coach and general manager, and that's exactly what happened. But look, all we can do is hope. All we can do is hope that somehow this Bill Polian GM expedition works out. All we can do is hope that the next coaching staff can get Justin Fields to the next level. All we can do is hope that this team isn't in as much trouble as it appears. Most of us know this team does not have it in its DNA to be sustainable, to have sustainable success. But I love this team. And I know everyone watching and listening loves this team. So while we may be pessimistic and cynical, every one of us still has hope that the stars will align at some point. And if that ever does happen, you'll be glad you stuck around. Speaking of sticking around, don't go anywhere. We have a lot more Buffone 55 right after this.
On the next Crosstown Crosstalk, White Sox pitcher Liam Hendriks. You'll only find it here on the Barroom Network.
Welcome back to Buffone 55. Now it's time to jump into some serious Bears talk, so I'm going to kick it back over to John to bring out our guest. John, take it away.
Thank you, Alyssa. Here to help us peel back the curtain on the Bears a little bit is Aaron Lemmy, who covers the Bears for CBS Sports Bear Report and Windy City Gridiron. Aaron, how you doing? Appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me on. I think this is the first time, right? I feel like it is. I feel like I'm losing my mind too. So maybe not.
Maiden voyage here on Buffone 55. We're excited to have you on here, and what a fun time to be on the show because there's so much going on. And I guess I'm going to start with the obvious because the Bears fired not only Matt Nagy, but they decided to move on from Ryan Pace as well, which for some people was a bit surprising considering the way things were trending. So what do you think ultimately went into that decision to part with not just Matt Nagy, but Ryan Pace as well?
Well, I think what it came down to was just, I mean, the results speak for themselves, don't they? I mean, it's one of those situations where you look at, there's seven seasons, 2 playoff appearances, no playoff wins, 1 winning season, and I think that's just really what it comes down to. I think everybody knew Matt Nagy was going to go. I think the bigger question, though, was, obviously Ryan Pace. And as we saw with Ryan Pace, even the relationship with the McCaskey family couldn't save him. And I think it's the right move, regardless if you find somebody better, whatever it is, you're setting a precedence that simply put, you're not okay with mediocrity. And I think that's something that you had to fear a little bit with the McCaskies, right? Is, they had so many bad seasons, right? They finally get Ryan Pace in here. They get the rebuild done. They go 12-4, 8-8 back-to-back seasons. They back into the playoffs this last year. And probably 8-9 years ago, we probably would have been ecstatic for them to be in the playoffs at 8-8. But, being locked in mediocrity the way that they have been is almost worse than at least, knowing you're bad and being able to rebuild and have some goal in mind to be able to get back to being good.
And looking back, at the Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy eras, if looking back at it, what do you think that each of their legacies will be in Chicago? When we look back years from now, what will we remember about both of them?
Well, I think with Ryan Pace, there was a lot of optimism. I wasn't a huge fan of the hire right out of the gate, but what I will say is I think as he kind of progressed, the idea in the ideas in the overall vision that he had in terms of rebuilding, I thought was really good. Again, this is a team that when he took it over, I think a lot of people forget just how bad it was under Mark Trestman and Phil Emery. This thing was a mess. It was an absolute mess. He comes in, they get John Fox hired. I know a lot of people don't like John Fox, but John Fox was a big culture stabilizer for this team. That was one of the big ways that they were able to establish what they established in 2018, right? So I think that a lot of people are going to kind of, at least in my opinion, this is how I feel about Ryan Pace, is they're going to tie a lot of hope that just simply didn't last. I think he did a really good job of rebuilding the team. I think the issue was maintaining the talent and getting to that next level. And I think a lot of it came down to a lot of gambles that he took that simply didn't work out. Obviously, you bank on Trubisky being the guy. You go into 2018 saying, okay, we have our quarterback. We have everything else under control. You go out and trade for a guy like Khalil Mack. And then all of a sudden, you're looking at a situation where a year later, you're realizing Trubisky's not the guy. What do we do now? As far as Matt Nagy goes, I think it's almost kind of a disappointment, right? You get this guy that that Andy Reid lauds as his best ever, offensive coordinator that he's ever had, and all these high expectations. The 12-4 season, everybody's thinking, okay, they finally figured it out. They finally got the right guys in the building. And it was just a steady decline ever since. And, again, Matt Nagy was a very frustrating coach, especially towards the end. But I think that at least for me, it was one thing, some of the different head coaches and different personalities the Bears have had over the years. I think that the one thing you can say is that Matt Nagy truly was a good guy. As a person, I think his biggest issue was that, he had a little bit of an unchecked ego, but I think the biggest thing is he saw the positives in everything, which I don't think left him overly objective to the rest of everything that was going on and the finding out the whys and everything else that we constantly heard. So I think overall, I think we're going to remember this as somewhat of a disappointment. I do think that the overall memory of Nagy is going to be much more negative than the overall memory of Ryan Pace. And I think it's somewhat unfortunate. I get why, but I think it is somewhat unfortunate just because things really just didn't unfold the way that everybody expected them to.
Much like we talked about in the last segment, it seemed like all of the goodwill that the McCaskey family built up in that, hour or so between firing Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy was just gone after his press conference. Now, we could probably do an entire segment on just the press conference itself, but looking at it holistically, what was your takeaway from that? Because I didn't think I could be any more irritated than I was from last year's press conference, but then they're really trying to do a good follow-up act where the sequel is just nearly as good as the original. What was your takeaway from that presser?
Oh my God. I just, how do you, it's like, how do you take such a good, well, I say a good moment for Bears fans. Obviously people lost their jobs. I think we should probably keep that in mind too, but a good moment for Bears fans. How do you take that away? It was like from the very beginning too. It's like he comes out, he talks about Jeff Dickerson, he talks about Parker Dickerson. It's like, all right, this is off to a good start. And then that weird segue right into the stuff with Matt Nagy's son's football game. And I didn't support any of that, but at the same time, that's a really weird segue. Like, why are you mentioning both of those in the same breath? And then it was just the smug attitude of George right out of the gate, the constant reminders to fans that he doesn't really know football and he's just a football fan. It's like, is that supposed to make anybody feel better? Because it doesn't. You're talking about leading. You're talking about the new general manager and the new head coach reporting to you, but you're saying that you don't know football and you're just a fan. It's like there's just it sounds kind of messed up, but I think my biggest thought process throughout that entire press conference was, how is it that nobody in the McCaskey family has learned football after all this time? How is it that the Bears don't somehow have at least somebody within their organization? I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, you look at some of these GM candidates, right? You got a guy in Kwesi Adolfo, and I'm drawing a blank on his last name right now. The guy from the Browns. He was a Wall Street business guy. He graduated from Princeton, and he didn't know that much about football. He's a football fan. He comes in and he starts learning the business of football. And then you have the McCaskey family who have run this organization for God knows how long, and you're telling me that none of these guys know football. I think the overall press conference itself was bad. What I will say is the things preceding that since have been a lot better in terms of, especially their GM candidates. I think they put a fantastic GM candidate list together so far, and I think Bill Polian is 79 years old. I wish he would have spoke. I would have much rather have heard him speak than a guy like Ted Phillips. But I do think they are on the right path, at least as of now, in terms of the process.
Yeah, and that kind of led me to my next question. Do you have any confidence in that search team of McCaskey, Phillips, and Polian and their ability to get it right at GM and head coach? Because like you said, they have, that GM list, especially those candidates. It's really encouraging, but do you have confidence that ultimately they're going to pick the right guys?
I want to. I really do. But I mean, how many times have we been through this? It's like I fast forward, I rewind back over the last 10 years. Like, how many times have we sat here and had faith that they were going to make the right decisions and they didn't? And so obviously the process is a little bit different this time around. Originally, I thought, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, they brought in Bill Polian, replaced Bill Polian with Ernie Accorsi 7 years ago, and you got the same situation, right? So we're going to have to see. I don't know. I'm very optimistic with the GM list. I don't know as far as the head coaching stuff. I'm not overly high on a lot of the head coaching candidates, I'll be honest, and that's just a personal preference. I know everybody's a little bit different, so I won't speak too much on that. And again, I mean, with general manager candidates outside of the guys who've already done it, which is pretty much Rick Smith and Jeff Ireland at this point, you don't really know what you're getting. It's kind of a mixed bag, and obviously, you're just going to have to see. So I won't pretend to be able to predict the future. Really, all I can say is what I've read and what I've heard from different people. And there are a lot of good candidates out there that the Bears have at least interviewed, and now it looks like Minnesota is taking the Bears list of the guys that they have lined up for interviews and doing the same thing. But I like the list so far. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic with the thought in the back of my head that the Bears screw this up every single time. So I've always kind of thought going on this process, as cynical as it sounds, the Bears are going to have to get lucky, right? They're going to have to get lucky. I think if they make the right general manager hire, everything else falls into place. If they can get the right football mind at the top, the president of football ops, with the GM is basically what George McCaskey's calling him. You get that right, I think everything else falls into place.
Just going back to what you said earlier about how's George never had to learn football, or why hasn't he learned football? When you're gifted a franchise that you can put on autopilot and make millions of dollars every year, maybe you are not inspired to learn football because you don't have to. You don't have to do the things that George Halas did. You can just say, I have the team now. whatever happens, happens. We could go 0-17 and I'll still make millions upon millions of dollars this year. So I think whenever you have some of these legacies that are in the football business who were, I don't want to say gifted the team, but it was passed down, you're maybe not as into it as the predecessor was. And so you see that watered down version, but I digress. There was a lot of talk about the GM and the head coach and which one's going to go first. And it sounded like George didn't completely slam the door on potentially hiring a head coach before a GM. Do you think that matters at all? And do you feel like they should get the GM first to have his sign off on the head coach?
I do. I'm a big process guy in general. It doesn't really matter whether it's football, whether it's anything. I'm a big process guy, and I've always been, especially, I mean, again, going back to what George said in his press conference, the general manager is going to be the president of football operations. He is going to be the guy that runs all of football operations, and he's going to be the one reporting directly to George, who is his boss and basically the final say over everything. So if that's the case, it would be like anything. I mean, you can kind of relate it to almost anything. Why would you hire your employees before you get the boss in play? It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So yeah, I think you got to go with a process, and that's why I've been a little cautious in terms of viewing these head coaching candidates that they have coming in and they're doing interviews. Because, I mean, if you look at the list, there's 18 guys in total. There's 9 general managers, 9 head coaches. I mean, if you start doing the math on that, if you're really talking about real interviews between 4 and 6 hours, it's going to take them to the Super Bowl to be able to get all these done and to be able to finally make a decision. So you'd have to assume right now they're probably going in the direction of, we're going to go an hour or two with these guys, get a good feeling, figure out exactly where we're at. You can make notes on all the head coaching candidates. If the GM is brought in and he's got another guy or two he wants to interview, great. But you have a short list there. But obviously, I think that the GM is the big one. You got to get the GM knocked down. You know, the Giants are finally in a position where they're ready to hire a general manager. Minnesota is finally starting to also, get their general manager candidates in terms of who they want to interview. They're in the same exact boat as the Bears right now. The Jacksonville Jaguars are another team that could end up looking for a general manager depending on what they do with Trent Baalke. Time is of the essence, especially when you're talking about having to knock out 2 of these, because especially with the way everything's going to weigh in terms of, the head coaching hires and the interview process as a whole with the playoffs. I mean, we've seen it. It's all timing based depending on who loses and the interview windows and everything like that. So you want to be able to have your general manager figured out, have him with his list of candidates, because they're already going to have an idea of who they want. And that's going to be a part of the, the overall interview process. But yeah, without a doubt, 100% in my mind, and I know some people agree, they have good arguments for it, I think you absolutely have to get the general manager figured out, especially if he's going to be the boss and he's the one running the football operations side of things.
And you mentioned, the GM and the head coach candidates, how you were more confident on the GM side of things than a head coach. But I'm just curious, of those that are currently confirmed to be interviewing or requesting to interview for the GM and the head coach job, who are some of your favorites? And are there any others out there that the Bears have yet to reach out to that you'd like to see them?
So as far as a general manager list, I mean, man, they've done really, I mean, I don't even want to sound like crazy optimistic, but they have really done a good job. I mean, even Omar Khan today, that was another name that it's like you have to have at the top of your list. And that's what I love about the balance of the general manager candidates, because it's not just pro personnel guys. It's not just pro scouting or the college scouting side of things. Like, you're talking about numbers guys. I mean, between Omar Khan and between one of the Browns candidates that they brought in, you have a good mix. Plus, you have Rick Smith, who's been a general manager before. You also have the same thing in Jeff Ireland as well. There's just a good mix. So in terms of the overall general manager candidates, Ed Dodds is my number one. I mean, he's my absolute favorite. There's definitely a few names, and it's funny because I don't have them in front of me, and now I start blanking on them. What I will say is and I tweeted this out. If anybody reads my Twitter, I'm sure you could probably go back and look. I have kind of a list, from 1 to 8 in terms of who I like there. From the head coaching side, that's why I'm a little bit more, I don't know yet, because I look at it and I say, okay, the Bears have had a tendency, and I'm sure everybody's noticed this, they have a tendency to go with what is weakest, right? So if you go back to after Lovie Smith, the offense had been so bad and they needed to figure out a way to get the offense going because the defense was there. They bring in Mark Trestman, everything blows up. They're like, okay, we need leadership. We need to go back to the defense side of the ball because the defense is awful. They hire John Fox. John Fox is in there for 3 years. They can't get the offense going. All of a sudden, oh my God, we have to have that offensive mind for our young quarterback. Let's go get the hot name on the market. And that was Matt Nagy. None of them have worked out. So I think really what this is going to come down to at least in my opinion, a little bit of a weaker, at least in terms of names. Obviously, these guys can pan out. But in terms of overall names, I'm not overly impressed by any of these guys. And it's not because they don't have good resumes. It's because I think you can kind of pick apart any single one of them. I mean, you got some of the retreads, Todd Bowles, that could make some sense. Leslie Frazier's the one that I will continue to say I don't understand it. Outside of him being with the 85 Bears, I mean, that's great. But if you look at his overall resume in terms of what he's done when he stepped into an organization versus when he leaves, the numbers really aren't that much different. Dennis Allen's another one I'm a little surprised that they haven't interviewed yet. But I think you look at some of the offensive minds right now, I think obviously, Brian Dable's one that I think a lot of people really like. Nathaniel Hackett's another one that I think could be interesting. You got the Aaron Rodgers factor there, but there's always a but about it, right? Even with a guy like Byron Leftwich, it's like, how much is it Byron Leftwich versus how much is it Tom Brady, and how much of the influence of Byron Leftwich being an offensive mind in Bruce Arians' offense, going back to even Arizona, how big of a factor has he played in this all? So again, I don't think that it's the candidates are bad by any means. I just think that there's a lot more questions. And, as Bears fans, as people who watch this team so regularly and seen all the failures, there's always going to be that side of you of saying, well, they tried hiring the hot offensive mind with Matt Nagy, and, you thought that would have worked out and it didn't. So, what is a real good head coaching candidate? So that's going to be more interesting. I really want to see him interview Josh McDaniels. I know that that's a little controversial just because of what happened, in his time in Denver, and then obviously with Indianapolis saying, I think he's a perfect fit for Justin Fields. I also think that he's proved that he can bring in good coordinators. Matt Eberflus was a guy that nobody knew about. A lot of guys were like, well, who is that guy? He comes in, obviously he keeps a job with the Colts even after Josh McDaniels bails, and he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. He's also one of the head coaching candidates that the Bears are going to interview, and he's another very interesting name. So that's kind of my overall thoughts. I'm kind of hoping the name pops. I don't think that Jim Harbaugh is going to be the thing. Ryan Day, to me, doesn't make a ton of sense. He's a 3-year head coach at Ohio State. He's got a great opportunity there. He can basically be there until he dies as long as he continues to win. And at this point, when you're top 5 in recruiting every year, why would you go anywhere? Why would you leave that job to come to a team like the Bears, even with Justin Fields? There's just a lot more risk involved.
Final question for you before we get you out of here. There's a great list of candidates and there's some interesting names on there, but ultimately those people have to want to come to Chicago. So I guess my question would be, compared to some of the other openings where there could be GM openings or head coach openings, where do you rank the Bears job as being high on the list as far as attractiveness for prospective employees?
Well, I think the big thing here to remember, and this is not a homerism take. I mean, this is just fact. The Bears are a charter franchise. Chicago is one of the greatest cities in not only the United States, but in the entire world. Like, it is a fantastic football town. It's a fantastic sports town. So the Bears are always going to have an allure that not a lot of other franchises have, right? And that's always going to put them at the top of the list. And then, I think a lot of it's going to come down to how do you evaluate Justin Fields? Because this roster doesn't have a great core, in my opinion, especially a young core, but they have some stuff to work with. But, really what it's going to come down to, you look at some of these other openings, the Giants, the Giants do have some pull as well because they are the New York Giants. But look at that roster. Look at their overall history in the past 6 or 7 years in terms of what they've done. There is absolutely zero stability there. Let's just say the Jacksonville Jaguars job's open. So you're going to fire both guys that you just brought in after 1 year. That's not a good look. And then Minnesota's another one where, again, it's all about where you evaluate their roster. Their roster is in a very similar situation to the Bears. The only difference is they got Kirk Cousins for 1 more year. And Aldo and I actually talked about this earlier, where a lot of it's going to come down to he's got 1 year left on his deal, but it's a big cap hit. So you kind of have to take that first year in 2022 and really figure out, is that worth going through to be able to get to the next year? What are the expectations there? Long story short, I think as long as you see Justin Fields is that top quarterback that a lot of us see, or that could be that top quarterback, the young guy, the promise of the franchise. And I think it is absolutely towards the top of the list in both the GM and the head coaching. Obviously with the head coach, you got 7 openings right now, could be 8 depending on what happens with David Coley in Houston. But I think that they're probably the top general manager candidate, at least in my opinion. And I think head coach would probably be, I'd say top 2 or 3 at this point. Because again, I mean, anytime you're the Chicago Bears, you're always going to have that pull. I think as long as you give the proper power and the proper, really just, the right to be able to do what you want, especially with a general manager spot, you give them that president of football office, which they already said that they're going to do. Great. You give them all the power in the world, and they're reporting straight to the owner of the team or the chairman or whatever you want to call him. He's a McCaskey, he's an owner, whatever it is. Then there you go. I mean, that's all you can really ask for as a GM. So I think that they're going to have no issue polling candidates. As we've seen, though, the issue is going to be, are they going to make the right decision? The Bears have never had issues polling people in. It's the choices that they made. They had Bruce Arians over Mark Trestman that they could have gone to in 2012. So it's all on Bill Polian. It's all on George McCaskey. I'm not even going to mention Ted Phillips because he doesn't belong in the interview room at this point. But it's all in them making the right decision. They're going to have every avenue at their disposal.
All right, man. It's going to be a fun process to follow. I hope everyone's following along with you for this. You got some great stuff. Before we cut you loose, give our listeners and viewers an idea of how they can follow you on social media. And then there's a follow-up question in the chat room if anyone has declined an interview with the Bears. But if you know anything about that, feel free. But before we get you out of here, how can people read your stuff and interact with you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Twitter at Aaron Lemming NFL, and you can read my work on thebearreport.com, and then also Windy City Gridiron as well. And then as far as the declined interviews, I usually, I don't know anything, but what I will say is usually if there's going to be a declined interview, that is usually kind of presented as they say, well, the Bears have requested so-and-so, but they've declined that. I don't think you're going to see any declines at this point. I mean, again, this is going to be a very preliminary process right out of the gate. You're talking 1 or 2 hours until they weed down. So I don't think we're going to see that issue. I think Dan Campbell was a little bit different. Dan Quinn was a little bit different, but no, I don't think that we're going to see any declines. It's just going to be a matter of how meaningful these interviews are and then them paring down the process.
Excellent stuff, Aaron Lemming. Thank you so much for being on Buffone 55. We hope to have you back on when all this stuff gets sorted out. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me on. Anytime you want me, you got me.
Appreciate it. We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this.
Hey everybody, Aldo Gandia here, and I got to tell you, several months ago, John Buffone came up to me and said, I got an idea for a new show. I want to call it the Bear Debate, and I want to debate somebody and just have an intense, high-powered discussion about all of the Bears issues that are going on. And I go, I love that idea. Green lighted. Who do you want to have on? And he said, of course, this gentleman. Tyler Ellis. Tyler, how are you, brother?
What's going on, family?
Gaines is here.
And I'm ready for this.
And he's representing the Chicago Bulls, a team that John Buffone has just inherited, adopted, right?
Yep, I'm part of Bulls Nation now. See Red, I'm all in. I gave up my free agency at the beginning of the season. I said I had my 2 hats in front of me. Actually, I had 3 hats in front of me. I was like, well, I live close to Philadelphia. I live closer to D.C., but man, I got a lot of Bulls friends that I wouldn't want to disappoint either. So I picked up that red hat and I said, I'm giving my allegiance to the Chicago Bulls, and they have not disappointed me. I can tell you that.
And they got a big one tonight, right, Tyler, against the Nets. That's on national TV on ESPN.
Sure do. Took care of the Nets. Hello, I don't say hello to everybody. Like, that's Alyssa right there. Can I get your autograph?
Yeah.
Like, let me get done with this show real quick. Like, Bears Wire.
Only if I get yours.
You have phenomenal articles, sis. I read your stuff on Bears Wire. Truly dope. Like, you're on it. Like, I don't know how much you multitask very well because and so
I used to have teachers, I had that down.
She was at a computer 19 hours the other day. 19 hours. Oh, man.
Too much.
mean,
Too much.
Money.
We're glad to have you on here, Gaines. This is your Buffone 55 debut, is it not?
I made it. Like, I've been good. I've been trying to be good. I've been good all year long. And I'm like, one day.
We called you up.
No, man, it's an honor and a privilege. Like, this show has been dope for many seasons. And it's just like, no, John, you killed it, bro. I was backstage like, tag me in, bro. Like, you charging me up. Because I was like, bro, give it to him, John. And Aaron was phenomenal. I'm a fan of Aaron's as well. And that was truly great stuff. And it's exciting times.
All right, well, let's get started with the Bear Debate. For those of you who may have missed the show, it's a very simple concept. I ask a question, and then Tyler or Ella starts off with a 30-second response, and then the other debater jumps in and provides the 30-second response, and then all of us talk about it afterwards. And this will be Alyssa Barbieri's so-called first entry into the Bear Debate. She will enter in the after-debate discourse as well. So this should be a lot of fun. So why don't we go to round one? We're going to have 5 today as opposed to the natural 10. Round 1 starts now. In the world of business, it is said that perception matters more than reality. As we know, on Monday, Bears chairman George McCaskey appeared in a Zoom conference call to discuss the firings of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy and answer questions from a media that was understandably adversarial. This is what McCaskey looked and sounded like.
Over 4 seasons, we beat the teams we were expected to beat. Too often, though, we didn't beat the better teams. And you have to do that to excel in this league.
Ted Phillips, although not properly introduced, was there too. Could the Bears have done anything to improve the optics of this very important news conference? Tyler, start us off.
Honestly, yes. Although I feel like they actually rushed their press conference. One of my thoughts early on was they actually made a big splash. In my personal opinion, I don't feel like they had to do a press conference because they kind of did something good and then left a bad taste in our mouth. They could have just been quiet for a couple of days and got a lot of publicity and just let us think, because when they started talking about their ideas, it kind of made me nervous. And so hindsight's 2020. Ted Phillips shouldn't have been there. He wasn't really welcomed, in my opinion. But I'm hopeful.
They could have done anything to improve the optics, Tyler. I won't list everything I did in the first segment, but it seemed like George's ace up his sleeve was name-dropping Bill Polian and his book about 50 times. I don't know if the Bears are selling ads within their press conferences now, but this whole thing sounded like an infomercial for Bill Polian. Regardless of your thoughts about bringing him into the process, it basically sounded like George was saying, look, I know you're mad that Ted and I are part of this process, but wait, there's more. Look, Bill Polian's here.
Was that supposed to be a selling point?
Exactly.
Just ridiculous. Just like, I feel like we've time traveled back to 2015 and it's just going to be the same, obviously substitute Polian in for Corsi. And it's just, I mean, like Tyler was saying, I mean, it was just, just like don't have the press conference on Monday. Like let Bears fans enjoy it for an entire day, because like that morning was really fun. Like it was enjoyable. I mean, obviously when you realize who ownership is, it's hard to get too optimistic, but I mean, it was a nice morning. The birds were chirping a little bit and like it was that false sense of hope and security, would be gone. And then George McCaskey opened his mouth and never closed it for an hour.
Yeah, and I think, everything was clouded by the announcement of Bill Polian being a part of that search team. And it would have been much, much more visually convincing if they were to put up an image of the 5 people involved in the search. And notice how Ted Phillips is way in the background over there.
Yeah.
He should be a lot smaller than that.
Yeah, it's like hanging somewhere in the back, not hanging like with a noose, but hanging around.
He should have been the Where's Waldo image on this. Like, see if you can find Ted Phillips, and his face is somewhere in the back of those trees past the lake, and you're like, oh, there he is. Good.
That's right. But they should have introduced everyone that's in the part of the search and show images of them, and maybe even have them there to answer a question and to let fans know what their role was going to be in the search committee, particularly the two people of color here, so that they weren't seen as token people in the search committee. This should have really been the 5 people at a panel, a long table with 5 microphones, and it should have been produced to really give people confidence. But instead, we got George all by himself. We got Ted looking clueless as to what was going on. It was not a pretty sight, and I think that's a big reason why a lot of fans are just not confident of that. They should have improved the optics of the whole thing.
I agree.
I mean, as you guys see in our head coach, PR isn't really our strong suit. So when in doubt, we'll send out our special teams coach to come talk to you.
Tell
first.
me. Yep.
And so it's just like I said, you shouldn't have had the conference because it's like it wasn't done correctly. It was rushed, and therefore you didn't present us in a united front, and it made us look more weak. We were excited about potential growth, but then when you talk, you're like, dang, there's more cracks in the armor than we think. I'm just hoping, like we said, I hope we get the right coach. You get the right coach, it don't matter. You get the right coach, and it doesn't freaking matter. So we're praying for a miracle. But Jesus, when people start admitting that they don't know what they're doing and they're making millions of dollars, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, Tyler is
Maybe
totally
we'll
right.
luck into it. We'll luck into it, maybe.
Luck into it.
Yep.
Maybe.
All right, let's head over to round number 2. Sunday, after the Bears lost to the Vikings in their season finale, then head coach Matt Nagy was asked what were the positives of the 4 years with the team. He said this.
There's a really good franchise quarterback that's here that's going to be good for a long time. And both Ryan and I were a part of that.
Unfortunately, Nagy will be remembered for not improving Justin Fields and being unable to help Mitchell Trubisky develop into a viable starting quarterback. Can you help Matt Nagy identify any real positives from his 4 years in Chicago? John?
Jeez, Aldo, why don't you just ask me to find Jimmy Hoffa? I'll probably have better luck. Leave it to Matt Nagy to make sure everyone knows that if Justin Fields turns into a superstar, that he had a part in it. But I guess the only positive is actually a negative. The Fool's Gold season of 2018. It brought us back to life. It filled us with energy and hope. And then much like how the 2018 season ended, we were greatly disappointed. So I guess the only positive was actually a negative.
I mean, 1,000% correct. I mean, honestly, with all due respect, I feel negligence. I feel there was negligence, but if you talk to Justin Fields, he always has everything positive to say against Nagy, and so I kind of got to take his word for it. The only positive is you got experience, because experience is the best teacher at the end of the day. Any experience is good experience, but it's just like Justin, I feel is strong enough from a mental and will perspective that he can adapt and receive information. Justin is smart enough to know I'm gonna go over that. Hey, there's more to this game. Let me stay positive, because what is Justin gonna say? Like, you know what I'm saying? If he says the wrong thing and then he's casted out, and so he has to like tread that line. But I'm gonna say it for him. Matt Nagy was negligent in the development of this young man, because Matt Nagy, for somebody that sat around Patrick Mahomes for a full freaking year, and you got that man prepared to be an MVP, and you have your freaking chance and you have a top 10 talent quarterback, and you get him not prepared to face the Cleveland Browns and get physically abused on TV, like, bro, I'm done with you. Don't even get me mad, John. This is
well, I know, but like, you thought, regardless of what you feel about Mitchell Trubisky or whatever, and I'm not going to go down this road of debating about Mitchell Trubisky, but the fact that he did have a number 2 overall pick and that he tried to develop him, you would have thought that he would have learned something from that experience. You would have thought that he would have taken something from that and then would have had better luck with Justin Fields. But and Justin Fields is more athletically gifted than Mitchell Trubisky, so he kind of covered up some of those warts. But it's almost like he did a worse job with Justin Fields than what he did with Trubisky, maybe because they were winning more and because the defense was so dominant that you kind of just glaze over that fact. But he's not going to be brought in to develop any quarterbacks anytime soon. Matt Nagy's actually from central Pennsylvania, where I'm located. So the local paper ran something about Matt Nagy being fired from the Bears. And of course, they all came to his aid saying, you know, no one was going to fix the Bears. It's not his fault. He's not going to stay unemployed very long. Can't wait to see where he lands. I can't wait to see where he lands either, because I don't know what he's going to do.
Right.
I don't know what his job will be, because he showed that he can't be a head coach right now.
Mm-hmm.
He showed that he can't call plays.
Mm-hmm.
He showed that he can't develop a young quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
What's his position going to be? What are they going to bring in? And I mean, at the college level, he might be able to thrive. His system might work there if it's a little more wide open and he's getting 5-star recruits right off the bat. So I can see him maybe going to the college ranks. But in the NFL, what is he going to be hired as? I honestly don't know. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I don't know what he would be overqualified to do at this point.
I'm sorry, Alyssa. There was a report that Nagy was on the Jacksonville Jaguars interview list. Have you heard about that, or can you confirm that at all?
I have not, but oh my god, I saw.
I think that
Adam
there was a
Schefter
fake account that put
yesterday
that out.
about him interviewing for the Dolphins job, or about the Dolphins hiring Nagy as their head coach, and I died. I was like, always look for the blue check mark, guys. That would, I mean, I could see him ending back up in Kansas City somewhere, especially if Eric Bieniemy gets a job elsewhere, like be it as, you know, offensive coordinator and Andy Reid kind of takes hold of the reins again, or, you know, throw him at quarterbacks coach, you know, because, hey, Mahomes is Mahomes, so you really don't have to do much with him. So, I mean, I could see him ending back up in Kansas City, but I mean, and like John, you mentioned, I think he'd be great for college. I think he'd do a great job in college. That's probably where he needs to end up at this point, but I don't think we see him. Is that real, the Jacksonville thing? I did not hear about that.
I cannot imagine that they would think, after that fiasco with Urban Meyer, they're going to say, let's bring in Matt Nagy.
Well, maybe they want to bring in a nice guy, right? But he just doesn't know how to do.
Oh yeah, well, that's true.
But at least Trevor Lawrence isn't a rookie next year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because he's so much better with Trubisky in his second year.
Yeah, I just checked the Google machine right away, and there's no reports of that. So I'm not quite sure where I saw that. It probably was bogus, but that would be the perfect time for him, right? With that dysfunctional organization there.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's move on now to round. Where are we? Round number 3. Back to Monday's press conference. George McCaskey said that the new general manager will be reporting to him and not the team president, Ted Phillips. McCaskey said that Phillips persuaded him that work on the new stadium will take up too much of his time for him to have this responsibility of the GM reporting to him. McCaskey then said that he'll have to learn how to do this new responsibility and that he would seek help from the new general manager. How comfortable are you with this scenario? Tyler, start us off.
I'm comfortable with it because it's something different. If you do what you've always done, you're going to get the same result, which is the definition of insanity. And so obviously I wish we had somebody in there who had a higher football IQ to be doing it, but at least it's something different. I'm really just begging my chips on that we find the right GM that has the right plan for George to actually like. One thing for certain, George should know what failure looks like. So I'm just hoping by this chance he should know when something good comes along.
Imagine you're on a job site like Indeed or whatever you use to look for jobs, and on one of the listings, the job description states, will be responsible for training your superior. It would be comical if it weren't so frustrating. This is just another misstep in that press conference that could have been avoided. I want to know who the media prep team is comprised of, or if there is a media prep team, because you have to know that the media and the fans are going to dissect everything you say, and there were a lot of gaffes within that 45, 60 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't convince me that he didn't know, he doesn't read or hear. He gets all those letters, right? He responds to all those letters of fans. And we know that there are probably not many nice ones. And if they're nice, they want something. But I mean, after nothing's really changed. I mean, this is a guy that for an hour basically just told Bears fans, I don't know football. I'm a fan. And he's supposed to be in charge of your GM. I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, is not surprising considering this.
You see why they only speak once a year, because
thank God.
Yeah, because I've been saying this. they would rather everyone assume they're the problem than open their mouth and prove everyone right. And so this is why they speak one time a year. That's why Ryan Pace spoke one time a year, other than, the team approved interviews that he would give sometimes. But this is why you probably only hear from George McCaskey once a year. So he only has to put up with this once a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I worked in corporate America, we would do media training for all of the executives, senior executives, and we would have them sit down. We would say, we need 2 hours of your time in the calendar, which is always a tough thing when you're asking a CEO, I need 2 hours of your time. But they would say yes, because they knew the importance of projecting leadership when they're talking to their troops, to their players, to their fans, to the consumers, and so forth. And that's clearly what did not happen with the Chicago Bears, because they would have a professional media coaching team would have said, all right, so how are you going to answer this question? No, you can't do it that way, George. You've got to project strength. So when you say that the general manager is going to report to you, you need to say, I have total confidence in myself to work with the new general manager on a plan that is going to get us to the Super Bowl as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. Responses like that is what we are craving. We're craving that. We're not craving this kind of doddering approach to leadership that George McCaskey displayed on Monday. It's sad that that's the team we are representing. And when I'm old enough to have remembered listening to George McCaskey talk at press conferences, and this was when he was in his 80s, and that guy even then sounded like a leader. Yes. Yeah. George Halas. What did I say?
Yeah. McCaskey.
George Halas sounded like a leader, and unfortunately, we don't have anybody at Halas right now that sounds that way. Hopefully, they'll hire one. So
his main thing was like, I know nothing. Trust me.
Like, bro, like, what was the plan? Like, are you doing this on purpose? Are you doing this? Are you intentionally trying to confuse us? Like, dang.
The Bears truly encapsulate the front office. No plan. No plan.
And did you see him? He was so proud of this new restructure, which is basically just kicking Ted Phillips out and then having the GM report to him, someone who does not know football. And I'm like, he looks so proud of that. And I'm just like, oh my God.
Don't worry, fan man's here. I'll take care of it.
Yeah. And to use the word, Ted persuaded me that he's too busy.
Right.
It's like, what? Persuaded?
Like he had to talk me out because he's just doing a bang up job, and it took everything in me to say, all right, Ted, you go ahead and step away from football. I don't know how we're gonna replace you. Thank God we got Bill Polian in the back, but like that was the phrasing, and just from I have a lot of experience with this as far as media training and understanding what you should say or what's the best way to put out a united front. And there just has to be, and this is the same criticism we had last year, where it seemed like they were sideswiped by a lot of these questions that were so obviously going to be asked whenever you retain Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace about why the offensive line was messed up, why you haven't gotten the quarterback position right. It looked like they were so unprepared. And then this year, it's just another version of that, where it's just like, you have to know how this is going to play, unless you are so disconnected from reality to think that if I say this, is it going to get a good reaction or a bad reaction? Unless you just do not care, which I don't think that's the case. I think George does care. I just think he gaffes a lot. So taking a shot at Olin Kreutz, yeah, that's going to have a bad reaction. Saying that you're just a fan, but asking for the fans' trust, gonna have a bad reaction. Lauding Ted Phillips, gonna have a bad reaction. Having a weird transition about talking about Jeff Dickerson and then going into the Matt Nagy situation, it's gonna have a bad reaction. You have to know that. Like, you have to have people around you at least to say, George, this ain't gonna play right. We gotta rework this a little bit. And then maybe you don't come out of the press conference with every publication who was happy about the firing and was supporting the decision about the firings. 2 hours later, you're on the front page of every sports section and you're looking like, you know what? So like, there has to be something that goes into that process.
George McCaskey was a former prosecutor All I have to say is that the streets are a lot safer now that he didn't pursue that career. I'm sorry, George. I'm just joking. All right, here we go. Round 4. As you know, the Bears have a pending purchase of $197 million for 326 acres of land in Arlington Heights. George McCaskey was very cautious with his words about the idea of building a new stadium.
All we're doing is exploring the property's potential. We don't even own the property yet, and any questions beyond that would be premature at this point.
Given the track record of this ownership team, how confident are you that the Bears will eventually build a new state-of-the-art stadium, and that if they do, that they'll deliver a fan experience worthy of the big dollars it will take to enter that venue? John Buffone, start us off.
Oh, there's money to be had. I have all the confidence in the world. You'll probably see that new stadium before you see the Bears in an NFC championship game. Now, God willing, I'm wrong about that, but they are savvy at making money. This is where my confidence in Ted Phillips actually comes in. They have an opportunity to make a destination location with hotels, restaurants, bars, casinos, fan entertainment zones. And if it's a facility with a retractable roof, it could be a location that hosts concerts, conventions, and maybe even a Super Bowl with the Bears won't be playing in.
I mean, all of those things sound great and awesome to see. But my confidence, why does he make something not weird? Bro, just say we're looking to upgrade and move on. Like you're being secretive about the wrong stuff. If you're in charge of moving us into another like modern era, be proud of that. We're not looking at the property, looking at the property, just say what it is and get over it. So that took away from the confidence. So I'm gonna let myself be surprised by any development because I can't even trust you to be transparent about the most simplest thing. So it was just like, bro, we should be excited about that. Give us something to like give us some crack, give us some cookies or something, bro, because we got a lot of sour milk over here. Like, come on.
I love it.
You nailed that. You nailed that because they are overly secret about weird stuff. Like we're just like, why is it like I always say, it's like the McCaskies have the nuclear codes and they can't let anybody know about it. Like just say what you're just say what you're doing. Like what why is that like you're on a need to know basis about this? Like what? This is not something that has to be completely behind the curtain. This is something you could actually be transparent about. This is, once again, this could be something that diverts people's attention away from all the bad stuff you've already said in this press conference. Give them hope about something. If we do have this facility, it's going to be the nicest you've ever seen. It's going to dwarf Jerry's World. We're going to have a state-of-the-art complex for people to stay at. We're going to have a screen the size of 7 school buses go across there. It's going to be beautiful. Like, you oversell it. Go ahead. Pump the fans up for something because you're doing a really bad job during this press conference. Get them excited about something. But
John, he could have said, it is our intention as this organization, we want to host a Super Bowl and we want to make sure we can give the best fan experience, but even better yet, Chicago Bears fans, we want to play in that Super Bowl. Even if you lying, that still feels good. It feels good. It feels good.
Yes. Nailed it.
I love
it's like they don't even believe the words that are coming out of their mouth. Like they don't even want to say something like that. But like you said, I don't even remember, right? I don't even remember at what point Arlington Heights finally came up in the press conference because it was just like, it was an hour nonstop. And but you know, give the fans something to be excited about because this team doesn't look like it's going in the right direction. And there's money to be had, like John mentioned before. And, you know, so talk it up, right? Because you know that those fans that are watching this press conference, that are listening, that are paying and buying tickets to Soldier Field and all this merchandise, they will spend a lot of money at that stadium. So just answer it. And it just feels like not only just ownership, but like, remember how Matt Nagy just like wouldn't answer questions about the silliest of things? Or, I mean, it just feels like, is that like a job requirement? Are they going to be like interviewing these GM and head coaching candidates and being like, okay, well, this is how we do it. This is how we do it with the Chicago Bears. We don't give answers to anything unless we are required to by the NFL. So, I mean, they were mentioning that they were going to look for, or Ted Phillips said that they were going to look for some similar qualities that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy had. At that point, I was just like, oh gosh, maybe that's one of them.
Good.
I love what all three of you said, but Tyler really nailed it when he says, why do you got to make something weird when it ain't weird? That is so perfect. That is so
Don't make it weird.
All right, we're moving on to our final round, round 5. The Bears have one of the strongest fan bases in the NFL, but there are signs on social media that fan base's love for the Bears is starting to erode. Studies also support this contention. One listed the Bears fan base as the 6th highest group of fans complaining about the team. If the Bears continue to flounder in mediocrity, is there a limit to your devotion to this franchise? Or do you have unconditional support for the Chicago Bears? Tyler, start us off.
I mean, unconditional is a strong word. I got to be controlling my finances because normally I would buy all the jerseys possible, but I got to be responsible. But what I will say is this: the Bears fans are just starving for winning. If we win 2 games in a row next year, everybody be back. We just want to win at this point, and so and I'm confident that we will. We have a nice young future leader in Justin Fields with our brand new organization. It only took the Chicago Bulls 2 seasons to do it. I'm hopeful.
I think it's not just fatigue from losing, although that is part of it. But if you're under 45 years of age, you've basically seen the Chicago Bears do the exact same thing throughout your entire life. They struggle to put together a high-powered offense. They construct a formidable defense. Then we watch that team waste the defense because they can't score points. Occasionally, they catch a flash-in-the-pan season every 5 to 7 years when they actually look like a playoff team, and then they look for a new GM and a head coach after that. They've been bad, but fans can almost predict the future with that team, and that's not entertainment. As for me, I have orange and blue in my blood, but much like my Uncle Doug would always show everyone, you can love something and still be perennially pissed off at it.
Yeah, I didn't know. Is there an option? Is there an option to get out? Because I can't. I don't see it. I don't know how to do that. Really, can I transfer somewhere? Right. But and you're, although you mentioned all the complaining, that's the thing is that while Bears fans are complaining, guess what? They're still tuning into the games. They're still showing up to games. They're still buying merchandise. That's the thing is even the complaining. And the McCaskies know that. They know that Bears fans are going to spend money. They know that whether they win or lose, they're still going to make money. Especially with the new stadium in Arlington Heights, assuming that's what happens. I think we all believe that at this point. So, even if there's apathy, still we're tuning in. You can't help it. And I think that's what, one of the things with a fandom like the Bears is, like John said, you got it in your blood. And because it's hard, you can't be a bandwagon Bears fan unless you're back in the 80s. So nowadays, if you're a fan, then you are a fan.
And then one thing we got to remember, just as Bears Nation, or even as a sports fan, I just like in the stock market, I love, for example, I love buying in low. I love buying in low because that's when you get the biggest return on your investment. And the same thing in sports. It's it's easy. I'm not a fair weather fan. I'm down for my squad when we lose. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be around just for the good. I didn't become a Golden State Warriors fan because they were winning. It's because I understand the bad times. And you have to go through the bad to appreciate the good, but that good and bad is at every single level. We're not talking about bad play. We're talking about bad leadership. We're talking about lack of vision. We're talking about lack of clarity. How can you teach young men that are new young professionals in corporate America that are multimillionaires, and you tell them to be obedient and do a task, but as a leadership role, you're not putting that kid in the best position to be successful? Shame on you. So if Bears fans have a legitimate reason to complain because the leadership isn't putting this talent in the position, because we get somebody like Khalil Mack, who's a generational talent, and he's not being taken care of. And so that sucks when you get people that can actually move you forward. So, but the people that are responsible for the development practice negligence. So now, real quick, it's exciting because we have new vision coming. So if they didn't fire Matt Nagy, it would be a real problem. But since they sold it, because when you get a new coach, it's always a chance. Now there's a chance. So there's a reason for optimism and to be excited because you never know. Shake the dice. Anything can happen.
I love it. I love it. If we were keeping score, I think everyone would get the 100 points and it would be a 3-way tie on this debate. You guys really, really brought it. This was very, very entertaining. Who's going to throw it to the break here?
I can do that. I just want to say real quick, I want to thank Tyler for being a part of Bear Debate throughout the year. We had a hell of a good time doing that show. It was so fun. I look forward to the next season of it as well, because it was a lot of fun, got a lot of good feedback, and quite frankly, it's just a good therapy session. So my man, my brother, I appreciate you. I appreciate you being part of Bear Football and the Bear Debate. Loved having you on Buffone 55. Glad we could get you on finally. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you down the road.
Thank you so much, brother. I definitely appreciate it. Alyssa, sis, you're awesome. Keep being great. And Aldo, you know what it is, sir.
Love you, brother.
All right, everybody. We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this.
Before I got into radio, I knew that he was somewhat of a knucklehead because, he alienated White Sox fans by immediately charging them money for a free product that they had been getting on TV. So he screwed that pooch up. But I also liked him. He picked up Pudge, Fisk. He also saved the White Sox. With Jerry and me, it's always been love-hate. He's been mad at me forever, but we've tolerated each other. I think, he'll always blame me for him getting rid of Reniak and Gallus, Rob Gallus. I was the major culprit there. I've been mean-spirited to Kenny Williams, and he deserved it. Darren Jackson, Ed Farmer, name them. I was hard on the White Sox, and he didn't like it. That's just the way it goes. I've been in his head for years. And you know what? I said, if I was your right-hand man, you'd win more than you're winning now. He told me I reminded him of his father. I go, did you hate your father?
Welcome back to this extended version of Buffone 55. And the train just keeps on rolling. So, John, who do we have next?
Well, Alyssa, I am thrilled to welcome our next guest to the show. You may know her as the host of the Bears Previa. Joining us live from Mexico, we welcome Nasli Briones to Buffone 55. Nasli, thanks for being on. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks you for inviting me. I hope my audio is fine. Do you guys listen to me well? Okay,
yep,
great.
Audio's great.
Cool. I'm excited.
I gotta start with this because I know how we reacted in the United States, more specifically in Chicago. But I want to know what the reaction was in Mexico with Bears fans. Was it equally as happy that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were eventually fired from their roles with the Chicago Bears? What was the reaction down there?
It was definitely the same. I'm in a lot of group of fans of the Bears, and everybody was thrilled. Like really, everybody was happy, and we make a lot of videos and podcasts and show our happiness to the world that finally we are out of Nagy and Pace. Now, well, we're just looking for who is going to be the next GM and the next head coach.
I love this like an international party, right? With Nagy and Brian Pace being gone. Football, American football is becoming an international game now. And, I was curious, what teams are most popular, where you are throughout Mexico?
I like to call them basic teams. And I will say there is Cowboys, Steelers, 49ers, and Patriots also. I will say those four are the most popular teams in Mexico, actually. And I like to say they are basic because a friend of mine wanted me to buy me a hat from the Bears, but he couldn't find anything from the Bears here in Mexico. So when he went to the store, the guy from the store told him, "Oh, we don't have Bears hat. We just have basic teams hats, like Steelers, Patriots, and Cowboys, and those kind of teams, you know. So I like to say that I'm a fan of a pretty good team, and weird also.
Yeah, I guess they're a pretty good team is a nice way to put it. So I have to ask you, with those basic teams, those are also pretty successful teams throughout the years, depending on which decade you're talking about. But I got to ask you, what possessed you to want to be a Chicago Bears fan? You could have chosen any team in the world, and you're and all of a sudden a Chicago Bears fan. So what curse was put on you that you became a Bears fan?
I fall in love with the city. Like, really. I started to watch football on 2012. I used to play flag football here in my city. I'm from Tamaulipas, which is in the north side of Mexico. But I have family in Chicago, so I went there for 6 months to learn English and whatever and have a good time. So I fall in love with the city and enjoy everything about it. Like the mix of cultures, the food, especially the food, and the fans. They are like really intense, and I just read about the team. I've been reading about all the history, and it's like it's the team that has like 100 years. So there is a lot to to see around the Bears and everything. So I just fell in love with it, and I was like, okay, this is my team. And also, when I saw for the first time the Bears, I remember this Matt Forte. He was the running back, so I enjoy watching him playing. So that's mainly the reason I became a Bears fan.
I got to ask you real quick on a follow-up. You're not from Chicago, so you can have an objective opinion about this. What pizza do you prefer while you're in Chicago? Do you like the deep dish, or do you like the thin crust and the tavern style? For you, what was your favorite going in there?
Deep dish, Giordano's, of course.
Oh, there it is. Deep dish for the win.
An upset.
Yeah, deep dish pizza. That's the best pizza ever. Like, for real. That's a lot of cheese in it. It's just delicious. I love it.
The more cheese, the better. I mean, I'm there. And so it sounds like you were partying a little bit. We had one of the comments pop up there after Matt Nagy was fired. So I was curious, as the Bears are embarking on this coaching search, what kind of coach would you like to see the Bears go after?
Well, I don't know yet, like, about a name, but just a guy who knows how to play calls, a guy who knows how to play calls and who takes, like, advantage with the guys he has on the team. Like, we have Justin Fields, we have Rockton Smith, we have a lot of good players, and the next coach, he just needs to know how to take advantage of these guys.
I agree, because one thing that we saw with the last coaching staff and the coaching staff behind that would be not being able to get the most out of their players, especially when you have just this year, for an example, that comes right to my mind is having Allen Robinson, a guy who had multiple 100 receiving years, and then can't do anything with them this year. So not being able to get the most out of the players, that's something that needs to be fixed. So I do want to talk about the NFL International Series, because when people hear that, they think about all the games over in London, and the Jaguars play a lot of games in London. They play a lot of games across the pond over in Europe. But there have been 3 NFL games played in Mexico since 2016, all at Estadio Azteca. So I want to ask you, when the NFL comes to town, or I should say comes to the country, what is the reaction to that? How excited does the Mexican fan base get when the NFL comes down? Because obviously football, or soccer as we say in the States, is probably king down there. But what is the reaction when football americano comes down there? What's that like?
Pretty wild, I would say. People here loves football, like there is a lot of fans in Mexico. You can see it through Twitter, different websites we have here, through national TV or whatever. We really do enjoy the game. And we have a lot of fans here, mixed stuff, like I said, a lot of Cowboys fans, Chiefs fans, Raiders, Steelers, etc., etc. So people get really excited about when NFL's get in town. It's really cool. I've never been in the Estadio Azteca to watch a football game, unfortunately. The last one I remember, I went to this flag football tournament, so I wasn't able to go there. But I have watched it on TV, and it's just amazing. It's really cool. I enjoy that the NFL comes here into Mexico because they have a lot of fans, for real.
Is it the same kind of atmosphere as it would be for a soccer match? Is it close to those two, where if because I know what the atmosphere can be like in a soccer match in Mexico. Does it get close to that level of excitement down there?
Yes, it does. Mostly because, we just have it once a year, like you have soccer every year. I'm kind of tired of soccer. So everybody just talks about soccer and soccer and soccer, but you just get to watch one time a year an NFL. So it gets amazing, like for real.
And speaking of excitement, it's the opposite that's kind of happening in Chicago. Most Bears fans don't have hope that the team can turn it around in 2022. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts about the Bears' future?
Well, first of all, we need to find a good GM and then a good head coach. So it's, I don't know. I mean, future seems bright to Chicago as long as they find the right guys to be in front of it. We do have a lot of, good players. So I think we can make it to the playoffs next year if we find a decent head coach and a decent GM. Maybe I might get cocky, but I will say we can make it to the Super Bowl in 2024.
Oh, okay. That was realistic. I thought you were gonna go with the 2022. I was like, hey, and then you hit it.
I'm realistic though.
I'll take it.
Realistic.
2024. I will take some time in my lifetime. The last time they were, I was in high school, and that didn't go well. So, I mean, give it to me 2024. Let's go.
Yeah, I will freeze myself till 2024. Thaw me out, and then I'll watch the Bears play in the Super Bowl. Now, you spoke of the Super Bowl, so I got to ask you: with the Bears season over, and you said a lot of your friends and a lot of the fans down there, they root for other teams. So I'm going to ask you, who is your pick to go to the Super Bowl? Who do you think can actually win it all this year? Because it's not going to be the Bears, but it's still the NFL playoffs. It's still very exciting. You still get to watch football for the next 3-4 weeks. So what are your thoughts on who can actually make a deep run for the Super Bowl?
Please, anybody but the Packers. Please. I don't want to see the Packers win the Super Bowl. No, but for real, I would like to see the Bills winning the Super Bowl. Imagine another Super Bowl between Cowboys and the Bills. That will be incredible. That will be amazing. And
speak it into existence.
Yeah, I love you, Heidi. So I will definitely would like to see the Bills winning a Super Bowl. I think that's owe
the Cowboys. They owe the Cowboys a Super Bowl win because they didn't have so much luck back in the early 90s whenever they went 0-2 with Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, all those great players that the Bills had, but the Cowboys had some better players. And the Bills, of course, going to 4 straight Super Bowls, just could not get over the hump there. But honestly, I want to thank you so much.
Jim Kelly revenge. Jim Kelly revenge in hands of Josh Allen.
I can't imagine what the streets of Buffalo will look like if they win a Super Bowl. Because I've always had great respect for the Buffalo Bills and their fan base. They're great people. They love the team, and they've gone through some rough years. They've lost 4 straight Super Bowls back in the early 80s or late 80s, early 90s. So if the Bears can't win one, go ahead and let them win one, and then I'll maybe see Mitch Trubisky get a Super Bowl ring, as somebody says in the chat room, which would be
that would make my heart glow.
That would definitely happen. That's gonna happen.
Mitch Trubisky gets his Super Bowl ring. but it's not with
He
the Bears.
deserves-
Not with the Bears. Yes. Before we get you out of here, please let our listeners and viewers know how they can connect with you. I know you got a lot of different projects going on, so you don't just cover the Bears, you talk about football in general. So let everybody know where they can listen to your stuff, they can see your stuff, they can follow you on Twitter, all that good stuff.
Okay, you can find me on Football Girls MX, also on Gol de Campo. It's just this fan base of football in Mexico. And well, you can find me on Twitter, on Instagram. I'm as Nasle Briones, so you can find me there and we can talk about the Bears.
Absolutely. She is the host of The Bears Previa here on the Barroom Network as well. Nasle Briones, thank you so much for being on this end of the year show on Buffone 55. We can't wait to have you back on and see another year of the Previa. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys for the invite. I was really excited about this and I hope to see you soon.
Sounds good. And we will be back with more Buffone 55 right after this. Welcome back to Buffone 55, and we just keep moving forward. We know the Bears will have a new GM and head coach in the near future, but that regime will be faced with their first NFL draft in the spring. So what direction will they take their maiden voyage? And for that, we'll bring aboard Danny Shimon and Neil Stopchinski, the hosts of Draft on Tap here on the Barroom Network. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the invite. How you doing, Alyssa? This is the first time actually I've been on a show with Alyssa, I believe.
Yes,
Same here.
that's awesome. It's a big
We're bringing everyone in.
It's a perfect time.
It's a
We
big
have
party.
everyone. I
It's a
love
big party.
Family event, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just bringing everyone into the bar and we're having one last blowout before we really hit into the off season. That's really where you guys take a hold of everything. This is where you're in your prime, you are in your glory. So we had to have you on to talk about the direction that the Bears may go in, because a lot of the talk is about the GM and the head coach and Bill Polian and the search and what all is the schemes and all this other stuff. But eventually that GM is going to have to start some roster construction, and that's going to start with this draft, even though the Bears don't have a first-round pick because they used that for Justin Fields last year. So, Danny, I'm going to start with you. For some people that may not know what the Bears have at their disposal as far as draft capital goes, they did also trade away a couple picks, not just for Justin Fields. So, how depleted are they going into this draft?
Yeah, it's played pretty depleted. I mean, they only have 5 picks going into this draft right now. They have obviously the first round pick, the 4th round pick are gone, part of the Justin Fields trade. I believe their 7th round pick went for the Jakeem Grant trade as well. So right now they have the 2nd round pick, a 3rd round pick, 2 5th round picks, and a 6th round pick. So the 2nd round pick should be roughly in the 39 to 38 range in the 2nd round, and then that 3rd round pick should be in the 71 range. So they're going to have 2 top 100 picks in the first couple of rounds there.
And so, Neil, I'm going to kick it over to you. If you're looking at this Chicago Bears team, and you see that there's probably a lot of holes in there. A lot of things need addressed, and you can't fix everything with free agency. Well, we know that. But with the amount of picks that the Bears have, what area of need do you feel they should go after right away? They could say this is the biggest need, and it's the biggest need that needs addressed with a draft pick.
Me specifically, I'm really worried about the offensive line room, specifically the middle, guards and centers, and I'm really worried about that DB room, specifically the safeties. You know, you got Gibson going into free agency this offseason. Eddie Jackson, I couldn't say enough bad things about him. he's still going to be kicking around, but hopefully there's a little bit of rejuvenation for Eddie Jackson this offseason. That's the only thing you can really hope with him. So I'm to me, and then the other two guys behind them, the depth guys, are also going to free agency as well. Bush and DHC. So to me, that room is insanely depleted. If you're looking at the interior offensive line, Daniels, Bars, and Mustapher all entered free agency this offseason. You got Whitehair coming back; he's under contract till 2025, and he's serviceable enough to get you through without necessarily needing to replace that position. But the thing about it is, guys, is that Daniels, he loves having too much fun playing football, and Mustapher gets pushed around a lot. I want more guys in the middle there that are strong, tough dudes that can punch you in the mouth. To me, like the interior offensive line, I think is the number one, position group that needs to be addressed. It was supposed to have been addressed last year. They addressed tackle twice, which I'm not complaining about that. I just wish that they had two different picks than what they picked. I like the fact that they did address tackle twice, but the specific guys in the room didn't exactly strike my fancy, to say the least. So interior offensive line, I think, is where you go with that late 30s pick, early second round. And then I think, once you get into the 70s, you look at a safety, you look at a receiver, because we are depleted there as well. We got a bunch of super midgets in that room, a bunch of small guys that can run fast. You don't have a single guy on that offensive side that is over 6 foot tall, except for Allen Robinson. And guess what? He's also a free agent. So I think that either in free agency or in the draft, you got to figure out a way to get a guy with some size, some athletic ability that can win, one-on-one battles against DBs. And then, again, just to go on the other side of the DB room, the cornerbacks, I'm not as concerned about the cornerbacks room as I am about the safeties, because, you got Johnson under contract for a while until 2024. Thomas Graham showed a lot of promise. You hope that he could develop in the offseason to become your number 2. Kendall Vildor still has enough to at least be a serviceable backup, maybe a nickel. And then Duke Shelley is still got one more year in a contract. So at least you have some bodies in the room, right? But still, you don't have a bunch of quality bodies. And so that's what concerns me. And so those are probably the top 4 positions I'm looking at.
Yeah, and you kind of look at this quarterback class, or you compare it to last year's with, you have, 5 quarterbacks that went there in the top 15. And you look at this year's draft class, or quarterback draft class. So, Danny, I was curious, how does this year's group compare to last year's?
To me, it doesn't. I mean, if you look at the grades I had on the top guy in this year's class, for me, is Kenny Pickett out of Pitt. I had him going last year in the 4th round. I like Kenny Pickett. He's got the size. He's got some moxie, a sneaky athlete back there, but he's not a guy that I would have drafted in the 1st round last year. So that's why last year, both Neil and I were adamant that the Bears, if they're going to go and get a quarterback during the draft, that was the year to go up and get one. That's why we were so excited when they went up there and got Justin Fields at the 11th pick.
And just to follow up on that, if the Bears would have stayed put last year, what position, as far as your evaluation goes, now they don't have their quarterback potentially, and they don't have a good quarterback class to choose from. So ultimately, and I know that he's not there anymore, but Ryan Pace did the right thing to steward the franchise into the future. And you were a guy that said you wouldn't have been upset if Ryan Pace was let go, or if you wouldn't have been, if he would have been retained. Is this kind of his parting gift to the franchise, much like Matt Nagy said in his press conference?
Well, I'll say
they have a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, Matt Nagy just told you guys, hey, when this guy's good, me and Ryan went up and got him. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of Ryan Pace, for me, and I know I got a lot of feedback in terms of why am I defending Ryan Pace? Listen, I think this guy did. I mean, he made mistakes, but they all make mistakes, but I think he put some talent on this team here, where you can kind of build off of it. And there's some young potential. All pro today was Roquan Smith. You got Darnell Mooney. You got Justin Fields. If you went into this year's draft without Justin Fields and you got to get a quarterback, I wouldn't advise him to move up or down for any of these quarterbacks. I would just say if you're sitting there at whatever pick 7, that for me is too high for Kenny Pickett. But you know how quarterbacks are; they are going to be pushed up the draft board. So if Kenny Pickett's the top guy on your board and you need a quarterback, it's a bit of a reach, but you probably would go that way. However, for me, if like, for example, if they're coming into this draft with just the 7th pick, I would try and make a trade for either a veteran, for Russell Wilson, or maybe even Deshaun Watson's cases, his civil lawsuits all clear up off the football field. Those are 2 guys I would kind of look at. Aaron Rodgers probably isn't going to come here. I think he actually told us he's not ever going to play for the Bears. So, but I would. Those are the 2 veterans I would concentrate on if I was the Bears and I didn't have Justin Fields on my roster.
Yeah, Neil, you mentioned, a couple big needs, one of them being receiver. Obviously Darnell Mooney being the only receiver under contract currently in 2022. So I was curious, Obviously the Bears don't have a first round pick, but they had that second and third and then kind of later on. So I was curious what receivers you think could be available, whether the Bears decide to jump and take one at 2, 3, or if they kind of try to find, I know Ryan Pace isn't in place, but maybe they find another gem in the later rounds.
That's a really interesting question because there's a few guys that I really like that actually could drop a little bit because of their injury situations. A guy like Drake London from USC, which had an ankle this past year. A guy like George Pickens and George Pickens from Georgia, Justin Ross from Clemson, guys that spent a lot of either this past season or 2020 banged up and not playing a whole lot of football the past 2 seasons. Again, I go back to my prototype: big, strong, athletic, can win one-on-one battles. All these guys, these 3 guys in particular, they're 6'3", they're 200 plus, they can run fast, they can jump high, were spectacularly highly recruited in high school. Right, you're talking about some of like the 4 or 5 stars, coming out of their respective classes, and so those are some interesting guys that otherwise, all things being equal, could have been potential first round picks that may drop a little bit to day 2 that the Bears could have a potential spot to slide in and snag if if they indeed do drop that far. I love David Bell out of Purdue. I think that kid has spectacular hands. I think he's got great moxie playing the position. He's very he's got excellent ball skills, deceptive speed. That's a guy that if he doesn't go first round, if they have a shot to nab him in early day 2, I would love to see that happen. And then kind of like a little bit of a dark horse to me. I know they talked about him a lot during media days leading up to the Final Four and then also the championship game. But Alec Pierce from Cincinnati, just watching him play versus Notre Dame this past year, create a lot of separation. Another guy with size, 6'3", 200. Very instinctive, excellent ball skills. Another guy that could just go up and get it. Those are some guys that just off the top of my head that I wrote down, right before the show started, that really stick out to me as guys that could either fall or guys that would be phenomenal picks for where we are in this draft without having to trade any draft capital, anything off the roster, future picks to move up and get.
Yeah, and Chicago fans, if we do lose Allen Robinson, Drake London would be a perfect replacement for him. Big kid, long arms, able to extend away from his frame to reel in that catch, physical blocker downfield. I think he'd be a nice. This guy was going to go his target a first round all the way. Neil mentioned he fractured his leg versus Arizona, so he's probably not going to be able to work out during the combine, so that could drop him down to the second round. That'd be a nice pickup, I guess. Again, his medicals would have to kind of dictate where he goes in the draft. But one guy that Neil didn't mention that I kind of like. Now he's a different type of receiver. He's not as physical and not a big yards after the catch kind of guy. But Chris Olave from Ohio State, Justin Fields' teammate. He's a guy that gives you some of that verticality in terms of speed downfield. Guy can get down, make some nice plays, get good body control. Another guy with good hands, be able to extend away from his frame and bring in the catch. Again, not a big guy, about 6 feet, 190 some pounds, but gives you that big play potential getting downfield.
The Bears were kind of in a similar situation a few years ago. Now they did have 2 second-round picks. This year they just have the 1, but where they had to kind of let the first round shuffle out and then see what was left, and then ultimately they went with Cole Kmet. Danny, I'm going to ask you: is this a situation where do you let the draft, if you're the Bears, do you let the draft come to you and then you draft the best player in an area of need, or is it coming down to we need a wide receiver, we have to take the best receiver available? What would be your thought process in that?
Yeah, I'll let the draft come to me because you just don't have the capital right now to move up unless you start dipping into next year's draft, and you really don't want to do that right now. So if anything, you probably want to trade down from the 39th pick and try to recoup some of that draft capital later on in the draft. Like I said, this is probably going to be another deep draft in the receiver pool, so that's going to be a nice area where you can maybe pluck some guy in the 3rd or 4th round. We can come in kind of like a Darnell Mooney, a 5th round guy, comes in, becomes a big contributor on your offense within 2 seasons. So for me, it's like a cornerback is a big time need. Neil talked about the offensive line, the defensive line, and basically, to put it simple here, guys, anything but running back and quarterback, I'm drafting or I'm looking at, because those are 2 positions that I'm not going to touch right now in the draft. But guys like in terms of a cornerback that might drop, a Roger McCreary from Auburn, physical corner, 4-year starter. The guy's got 30 pass defense, so he's got some ball skills, 9 interceptions in his career. A guy that's a very good open field tackler. So that's a guy, Roger McCreary, from Auburn. If he drops down that pick 39 area, and if you see there's more other corners that you have highly rated on your board, maybe you can slide back a little bit and recoup some of those draft capital. That's the idea, or that's the plan I would have if I'm the GM.
And if they do stick with that and stick at number 39, pick 39, who do you hope falls to them, like at a position, whether it's receiver, corner, or offensive lineman? Who are some guys that you think could fall to that 39 spot? And Neil, I'll start with you.
Man, there's an interesting group of interior offensive linemen that may not be, all the way first round picks. That and you're talking about a position group too that isn't nearly as deep to me as it was last year. Which is why I was hoping that we were able to address that a little bit last year. But you got some guys such as there were a couple guys from LSU that Danny and I had evaluated for last year's draft that ended up staying in. Chase and Hines from LSU, Ed Ingram from LSU. Chase and Hines to me was a dude that is uniquely athletic and has a lot of strength at the point of attack. And Ed Ingram was a guy that had a really good year that just want to try and solidify his draft stock, move up a little bit. Both those guys, I felt, me specifically, were third, fourth round guys last year that probably solidified themselves as day 2 guys, probably not dropping to day 3. Zion Johnson is a guy that played left tackle for Boston College last year that to me reminds me a lot of Rashawn Slater in terms of a guy that is athletic enough and smart enough to really play all 5 positions across the way, but probably more adept to play on the interior. He's a really smart kid. He played on the interior this year after starting every game at left tackle last year. So he's a kid that's really interesting to me that could be a round 2, round 3 guy. And then again, I talked about Mustafa. Really not, man. It bothers me when I see him in the backfield. A couple of those guys in the interior offensive line spend almost as much time in the backfield as David Montgomery, and that really bothers me. And so I want tough, physical, athletic guys, either on either side of the center or snapping the ball themselves. And the Linderbaum kid from Iowa, the Tom kid from Wake Forest, and the Parham kid from Memphis were 3 guys that I love their athletic ability. I love their strength at the point of attack. I love their lateral agility, the quick feet, the hands, and just really overall intelligence and versatility. Tom is a guy that's 6'5", that has played at tackle, that went inside this year because he was the best guy for the job. So that's really intriguing to me. I love guys that have position versatility. So just to throw some names off there, those are some guys I'll be looking at to hopefully fall into day 2 for us. Not surefire first round picks. I wouldn't say guys that would probably be there if we said our prayers and everything fell the right way.
And for me, I don't think Neil left any players here. So I mean, I'm going to go through my board here and see who's still available. But I touched on the cornerback position. We talked about McCreary from Auburn, is a guy I'm really high on. This kid Trent McDuffie from Washington, 5'10", 195 pounds, pretty good cover corner, very good open field tackler. Again, for the Bears secondary, if you can tackle in college, I want you in the Bears secondary, because we saw that tackling was an issue in the Bears secondary this past couple of seasons. So those are the guys at cornerback that I like. Receiver, we mentioned Chris Olave. Neil touched on Alec Pierce from Cincinnati. I think he's a very underrated kid in terms of that receiver position. In terms of later on, David Bell is another guy I like a lot. And then Jahan Dotson, the little spark plug from Penn State, quick twitch guy, a guy that gives you, again, that speed element, the guy that can get the ball in his hands and he can make plays in the open field as well. In terms of the offensive line, again, there's this kid, Jackson Kirkland out of Washington, 6'6", 310 left tackle, all Pac-12 kid. He's a guy that if he's there in that 3rd round area, I think he's a guy you could bring. He plays with nastiness and some toughness to him as well. And for me, at least, left tackle is still a big question mark. And I think that's an area they need to secure, if not through the draft, through via free agency as well.
I got a question for both of you, and it comes down to philosophy. And this kind of goes with the question we got in the chat room about who Danny and Neil's top pick for available GM candidates are. But I want to start with this, though. We know Ryan Pace was very aggressive when it came to the draft, where if he saw a guy that he wanted, he had no problem kicking the can down the road and sacrificing picks in the future to get to what he wants today. If let's put your GM hat on, what would you prefer the new GM's philosophy be with the draft, whether it be, trade back and try to accumulate a war chest, or be aggressive and try to get the guy that you want? What do you want the philosophy to be for the new GM, and do any names ring a bell whenever you think about that philosophy? Neil, I'll start with you, and then Danny, jump in.
I love the idea of being aggressive, to be honest with you guys. I absolutely am that type of person. If I'm the GM, I'm going to be as aggressive as possible. I'm going to go and get the guys that I want and not allow anybody else to, slide in before me. The thing about it is, you also don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face doing that either. Last year, Danny and I were kind of pissed off, day 2 when, Pace gave up our other day 2 pick in order to get a guy that we didn't like. And that was available for 4 weeks this year. So, that's one of those things where, you got to be aggressive, but you got to do the right things as well. In terms of guys that I love for the GM job, Ed Dodds, to me, knowing him personally, knowing how he operates, the couple years when I was a pro liaison down in Mississippi State, I couldn't think of any other guy that was as thorough in terms of doing his job, asking the questions, being around for practice, watching the film, meeting with coaches and support staff people, just getting the job done, finding out about players, being a scout. And that's the thing about Ed Dodds is that, when he was at Seattle, that was his reputation of being an obscenely thorough, scout that, he squeezed all the juice he could out of the fruit. Right. So, and then, getting to know him as a higher up guy in the front office there, the number 2 guy at Indianapolis, I think he's, a surefire, easy target for the job. Outside of Ed Dodds, I like a guy that's already in house, Champ Kelly. I think Champ Kelly, also being able to deal with him for a couple years down, when I was at Mississippi State, he's a guy that's not going to walk in and own the room, but he's going to own the room, if you know what I mean. Like he's not obnoxious. He's not authoritative. He's not boisterous, but, he has a kind of intelligence and wherewithal about him to be able to, get the job done, I think. And, another guy that, asked the right questions, that was about the right things, that, understood what worked, here in Chicago. Those are 2 guys that, immediately off the top of my head, I really kind of liked. I listened to Danny talk about Jeff Ireland the other day, and I was able to spend some time around him as well. Big fan of his. Again, former GM, like you said, Danny, and I think that was at Miami is where he was a GM at before he got to New Orleans.
Yep.
And people have a lot of great things to say about him. If we can't get Ed Dodds, I want the guy that Ed Dodds recommends, and that's Morocco Brown. Right. Because that, if Ed Dodds likes the way Morocco Brown does his job, he probably is doing something right. Outside of that, I thought it was really interesting right before we all went on today. Joe Shane out of Buffalo came across the wire that he was going to be interviewing for the job. Wasn't able to spend a whole lot of time around Joe Shane, but he's another one of those cerebral guys that gets it. Would not be upset about that one. Actually, I'm very happy that he's being interviewed, because he was actually a guy I thought of before this whole thing happened. And then 2 guys that haven't been talked about with the Bears yet, but just came up today. And one guy I just found out just came up in terms of the Giants job is Joe Ortiz with the Ravens. He's a director of player personnel. Ryan Cowden with the Titans, the vice president of player personnel, are 2 guys that are very extremely well respected in organizations that are buttoned up, that have done a really good job of evaluating and finding talent. And again, like Ed Dodds, doing the due diligence and asking the questions. Those guys to me are 2 that stand out that have not been talked about yet, that I would like to see talked about. And then a couple of dark horses. I think Kevin Kelly from the Chargers is a really interesting bet. And John Eric Sullivan from the Packers. 2 guys that just in my dealings with them, I really like the way they go about their business. So those are some names that pop off the top of my head outside of the ones that we've already talked about. That really intrigued me.
Well, for me, John, in terms of the mentality of a GM, I love aggressive GMs, but I also love GMs that like to recoup draft picks. I don't like to give away draft picks, although I will tell you that I hate it. It makes my blood boil when draft picks are given away. However, if you see a difference maker at a key position on a football field, for example, quarterback, edge rusher, left tackle, cornerback, those are the positions. If you see a difference maker fall, for example, last year, Justin Fields, you go up and you make that trade, you get that kind of player. But if there's an offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman, there's a defensive tackle, there's a running back, you can always kind of wait for those guys to kind of fall to you. But I do like guys who have the aggressive mentality, but also have their future in mind in terms of, keeping draft capital and always being able to recoup it somehow, some way. And in terms of some of the guys mentioned, I'm very impressed by the names so far that they've put in requests for. My top guy has been Rick Smith from the former Texans GM. He's a guy that built that Houston franchise basically from the ground up as an expansion team. It went to, I think, 4 division. They won the division 4 times out there. Unfortunately, had to leave due to some medical issues with his wife, gave up that position. He's been out of football for about 2 or 3 years, but you notice once he left, that Houston organization just was downhill from there. So that's a guy that's top of my list right now is Rick Smith. Jeff Ireland, Neil talked about it. I talked about him on our previous shows. He's a guy that I've dealt with before. Very, very smart guy. I think he had a raw deal in Miami back in 2008. I remember he was the guy who asked Des Bryant if his mom was a prostitute, and I think that just kind of blew up on him. It was just part of the background stuff, and then that kind of just took a life of his own, and I think he got a raw deal. But if you take a look at his body of work, he's been with the Saints since 2017. Take a look at those Saints draft picks, those draft classes. That's been all Jeff Ireland. So if you want to talk about scouting and plucking players later on in the draft, finding undrafted free agents, Jeff Ireland's a guy that can come in here and do a good job for you as well. And I'm a big fan of Ed Dodds as well. So those 3 guys right there are my top 3.
We do have another question from the chat room from Tony Moy. He says, do you draft a middle linebacker to play alongside Smith or some depth on the defensive line? I don't know, you don't have to go into too much depth on this, but what would your decision making be in this, Neil? I'll start with you, Jenny. Jump in.
Yeah, yes and yes, to put it simply. Inside linebacker was a position that I really hope that we made a decision at and found a guy last year, to be honest with you. Now, Ogletree did a really good job of, jumping in lieu of Danny Trevathan, with him, being in and out of availability. But, the thing about it is, I mean, this is Trevathan's last year with the Bears, probably his last year playing football, to be honest with you. If you watch the way the guy plays, he had a better year this year than he did last year, but still not good enough in terms of, being able to hang in there and be a highly productive player. So, inside linebacker would probably be 6th on my list in terms of importance. Interior defensive line, obviously, Hicks is on the chopping block. Bilal Nichols is also on the chopping block. Hopefully they go and are able to figure out a way to re-sign him in the offseason. 25-year-old that really had a breakout year in a lot of respects, I feel. And then you look what else is in that room. Goldman's there. Mario Edwards is still there for another year. Angelo Blackson's there for 1 more year. I think we have a good quality group of guys in that room at that particular set of positions that you can really make some things happen. Can Goldman stay healthy? That's always a question. Can he stay healthy? Can he keep his mind right? We all know Hicks has had his issues with injuries, and that's really hamstrung our defense for the past couple of years, and so that's obviously bothersome. It's literally like Joakim Noah at the end of his time with the Bulls being held together by duct tape. I mean, it sucks to see it happen to such a great player that really bears the heart and soul of what this defense has been since his time here. In terms of interior defensive line, if you can find a guy that falls to you, I probably wouldn't go out of my way, to trade up and get one, even though there are a handful of guys I really like. I think we saw 2 of those guys play at a really high level the other night on Monday, but that it's not a deep group this year, in my opinion. I wouldn't break the bank to try and get one. They're probably all going between, pick 1 and pick 38. So, see what you can get there. Edge wise, I feel comfortable there. Mac obviously has his injury issues, but Robert Quinn's wrapped up for a couple more years. Travis Gibson's coming on, and he's wrapped up for a couple more years. You got a couple more bodies in that room as well. So that'd be a position group further on down the way. Maybe for depth, you try and snag a guy on day 3 with that 6th round pick. But I think between those 2 positions, inside linebacker is probably where I go if I had my druthers.
See, for me, it's the opposite because I'm a trenches guy. I think everything's built in the trenches, and depending on what we do here in terms of defense, who's the defensive coordinator? Is it going to be a 3-4 scheme? Is it going to be a 4-3 scheme? If it's going to be a 4-3 scheme, I mean, you have the ends to play 4-3. If you bring him back Bilal Nichols, I think he could play a 3 technique. He's got the quickness and ability to shoot that gap and get upfield. So it all kind of depends. But yeah, if I had to pick between a middle linebacker or a defensive lineman, it's always going to be a defensive lineman for me because everything starts up front. If you have a weak defensive line, I don't care if you have great linebackers, they're going to get exposed because those offensive linemen are going to be able to release and get upfield and get on those linebackers and block them out. So if I had to pick between those 2 positions, I'd pick a defensive lineman first with the draft, and obviously I can always go in and fill in a linebacker with a veteran free agent like Alec Ogletree. Maybe you can bring him back again, depending on if you're playing a 4-3 system. If you're playing 4-3, you're probably going to have Roquan Smith playing middle linebacker. Now you need 2 outside linebackers, traditional outside linebackers, a weak side and a strong side. So it's all kind of in flux right now. now. But yeah, just by going off position, the way I like to build my football team, for me, it's all up front, and I'd go defensive line first.
Yeah, all things being equal, 100%. I'm always going to be on that train of thought. It's always about the trenches first. And then the fun thing about all this is that all these thoughts that we have about all these players could easily be tossed up in the air over the course of the next 3 weeks, depending on who they sign, who they hire as a head coach. Because it really all depends on what kind of schemes are going to be brought in and who they prefer as personnel and what kind of things we're going to be looking for. So it's going to be interesting to watch these interviews unfold.
Absolutely. And before we cut you guys loose, got a lot of great draft info here, and this is only barely scratching the surface. Danny, start us off. Tell us what your schedule's looking like for Draft on Tap, how people can listen to it, how they can interact with you, and then Neil jump in with any additional information there.
Yeah, we're excited to get going. Neil and I, like I said, this is our time right now. This is our off season. It's draft season. We got our first show is scheduled to be on January 26th. You'll find us here on the channel here, and at 8 p.m. Central is when we kick it off. And then after that, we're going to start previewing the East-West Shrine game, and we're going to start previewing the Senior Bowl as well. Neil and I are going to be able to scout some of those players at both those All-Star games and break those down for you specifically. Obviously, we're going to have our normal list of great guests that can give us some of that expertise in terms of outside, and if we're doing Southeast Conference, if we're doing ACC, so on and so forth. So look forward to another great year of just breaking it down, and we're going to be a little bit different this year. We're going to be a little more specific to Bears needs. So hopefully by then we'll have a GM in place, we'll have a head coach and a coaching staff, mostly in place, and we'll kind of know in what direction the Bears are going. And then Neil and I are going to be let loose by Aldo there just to go ahead and find the best players for these Bears in the draft order that they have coming up.
Yeah, Danny, you pretty much hammered it, man. I mean, outside of that, like you see our Twitter handles right there. Hit us up, give us a follow along with us this pre-draft process. Ask us questions. Throw feelers out there, throw suggestions out there. If you guys want to hear any specific guests, if you want us to talk about any specific, players or whatever the case may be, throw that out to us and especially the players part, so that we have some time to actually get some good film and break those guys down. But yeah, I mean, going into All-Star Week with East-West game and Senior Bowl, we're going to have all the film, coming straight to us, which is the same thing that we did last year because we weren't able to actually be at the game. We're not going this year either. Hopefully 2023 is a different way. Hopefully we're able to get down to Mobile, all three of us, and we can get you some player interviews and do some live stuff and have a lot of fun with it. But this year we'll do the same way as last year in terms of just watching the film, giving me some good evals, talking about Bears needs, and rocking and rolling, man. Continuing the positive momentum.
Excellent stuff. Draft on Tap, a must listen. If you love the draft, you got to listen to Draft on Tap. Danny Shimon, Neil Stopchinski, thank you so much for being a part of the end of the year show on Buffone 55. Good luck to you. Your journey's just starting. Ours is winding down. Yours is just starting. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you down the road.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this.
It just pisses me off to the fact, to no end, to see him on another team when he should still be with the Hawks.
Rocky Wirtz should call Stan Bowman and just remind him that he's still fired because of that trade. Just call him up, Stan, how you doing? How's the family? Oh, by the way, just so you know, you're still fired.
I mean, he's so good, dude.
And it made me laugh when Panarin was on the Hawks. He's only good because of Kane. Are you stupid? Did Kane ever have 100 points before Panarin came along? What the hell are you talking about? So, I don't know. That used to piss me off, too. And I'm happy that when they did trade him, he proved that it wasn't because of Patrick Kane. And I think every normal, rational Blackhawks fan would agree with me on that, saying that they're happy seeing him have success without Patrick Kane because Artemi Panarin deserves his props as well.
Oh, yeah. And it's not his fault he was traded. You can't hate Panarin because the Hawks is an idiot.
I don't hate Panarin.
No, yeah, I love Panarin.
Bowman lost 3 trades involving Brandon Saad. Not 1, not 2, 3.
I love Panarin because he gets in. You could tell he's passionate. Like he's throwing gloves over at Brad Marchand. I love this guy.
Welcome back to Buffone 55, and it wouldn't be a true Buffone 55 unless we ended the show with Buffone's basement. That's where Alyssa and I open the cellar door, we walk down the stairs, and we dump a big old bucket of ice water over Aldo Gandia, who inevitably has fallen asleep in his recliner by now, watching his favorite Angela Lansbury mystery. Aldo, how you doing, buddy?
Holy cow! You know Angela Lansbury?
Oh, who doesn't know Murder, She Wrote, man?
Yeah, well, I dated her in the 50s.
You were both in college.
That's right.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. What a sensational show with great guests and outstanding pacing to it. And just by reading the comments in the chat room, people are really thrilled with what you've put together, both you and Alyssa here, for this finale for the season.
Absolutely. And, this is a good way to go out. I wanted to bring everybody who was part of the season programming and then kind of usher in what the program is going to look like moving forward. So we bring the Draft on Tap guys on to let them know that we got you covered. Even in the offseason, we'll have you covered for what the Bears are going to do in the draft, what they're going to do in the offseason. So the programming's not stopping. This is our end of the season wrap up here, but we ain't going anywhere. So make sure that you're still subscribing to that Bar Room Network. But Aldo, I'm bringing you on. You did a good job moderating the Bear debate, but now I got to get some opinions from you and obviously from Alyssa as well as we go around Buffone's basement. I want to start with the Ryan Pace firing, because although you actually changed my mind on this. You have been calling for this for longer than almost anyone I know as far as Pace need to go. Was this just affirmation to you that you've been calling this for a long time and it was just something that needed to be done and you were just relieved, happy, joyous? What were the emotions there?
Yeah, and again, it's always tough when you are praying for somebody to get fired. Right. But he is a multimillionaire, I'm assuming, and so I'm sure he's going to get a great job somewhere down the line. He's clearly has some talents as a general manager. My concerns about him was just that he allowed himself to get kind of pushed around by the McCaskey family. When you are told, that you've got to keep Jay Cutler, because the story is that Chris Ballard came in and interviewed for the job, and he said, the first thing I will do is release Jay Cutler, which meant having to suck up tens of millions of dollars of his contract. And Mr. McCaskey said, well, that's not going to work. And so Ryan Pace was forced to deal with Jay Cutler for those 2 years, and then was told that John Fox is the best coach, and that was not Ryan Pace's choice to be the head coach. So when you are allowed to kind of be pushed around by management that way, then you're not the right person for the job. You just are not, because you've got a position like that, and management should know this. A position like that, you've got to bring in somebody with a vision, who has then a plan to execute that vision, and then you let that person go. And so that is the problem. Now, the good thing is I heard Dave Wannstedt say during the after game show on NBC Sports Chicago, he says, this is still a really good job for a general manager, because you're not going to have an owner who's going to come into your office and say, why did you run that play? Why did you call that formation? And he was clearly talking about Jerry Jones. And so the Bears offer that, which should make it appealing to some top-notch general managers. So I'm happy that the job is still going to appear to be appealing for people. And I'm glad that Ryan Pace has learned here over the 7 years. And I wouldn't doubt it if he's going to have success as a pro player personnel person, a drafts personnel person, because he wasn't a complete idiot, as unlike some other general managers we've had in the past.
Yeah, and one of the big things that they always preached about was the culture, and the culture that Matt Nagy and the players liked them, and they liked the culture that those two brought, even though it wasn't like a winning culture, it was a culture. So, Alyssa, I didn't get to read the full transcript or see the interview or anything about James Daniels saying it was a fun atmosphere playing for the Chicago Bears and how he missed Matt Nagy and all that stuff. does that kind of feed into it? He was maybe too much of a player's coach, or he didn't want to ruffle anyone's feathers or hold anyone accountable. What's your take from that?
Yeah, and I know. I think we talked about it earlier in the show. I think that we both agree that I think the Bears need someone that's going to be, a little tougher with the players, because that's the thing that you hear about Nagy was that the players loved him. You had Club Dub. It was fun. And yeah, that works in 2018 when you're winning football games. But when you have 2019 and 2020 and now 2021 where you are at 500 or below, it's just not getting the job done and something needs to change. So, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that maybe too much, because James Daniels, I heard it. I was listening to it on the Score or ESPN 1000, one of those, like the whole exchange. And he was kind of talking about his time at Iowa and like the difference between, like a winning culture and then him having fun with Nagy. And that was like the main thing he focused on, was that they had fun. Obviously, most of the fun's going to come when you're winning games, but it does sound like Nagy didn't really hold people accountable. And that's, I think, what the Bears need at head coach. And that's why we've been high on someone like Jim Harbaugh, because we know that's exactly the kind of coach he is. He's going to do that. You need some of that tough love sometimes, because we talk about this culture that the Bears, want, and we think that winning, right? Winning is the culture, not just like having fun and, people being nice guys, which apparently the McCaskies think that's a great culture. So, I mean, I think we need someone that's going to hold these players accountable and get the most out of them. So, I mean, I think to kind of sum up your question, I do think Nagy was probably a little too nice. And again, it works in 2018. It did not work his final 3 years, which is ultimately why he's not here.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, the whole issue of being buddy-buddy with players, I mean, you have to be really careful with that, because once you become too friendly with your, so to speak, employees, they can start to kind of take advantage of you a little bit. And in the game of football, where you got all these alpha males, they can really take advantage of you. If you go back to when Tressman was here, and Lance Briggs on the first day of training camp asked for permission to go to the opening of his rib restaurant in San Francisco and missed the first couple of days of practice, that's the kind of culture that you don't want. And it just seemed like Matt Nagy extended that to some degree with the players. And I'm not saying that you can't have a fun culture and not be a tough coach. You can have both, but you have to have, it's a very delicate balance. You've got to make sure that everybody is accountable. And one of the salient points that George McCaskey made at that press conference was that he saw in game 1 against the Rams a defensive back not touch down a wide receiver who had caught a long pass, not touch him down and secure the tackle. And he saw the same thing from a different defensive back in week 17. That's how the season was bookended. And that is a squarely pointing the finger at the coaching staff. You just cannot have your players do that.
And Aldo, you, I believe, tweeted something out about James Daniels, did you not? About how, because we talked about this weeks ago, and I think we were both supportive on maybe giving him another chance if the price was right. Did that change your opinion, or do you think a new coach can change his mentality?
Yeah, I think a new coach can change his mentality, but, it does worry me a little bit when I think the biggest issue, and I hate to keep coming back to this, but I think in today's day and age, players, coaches, owners, everybody needs a little bit of media training. So that when Mark Potash, he was the one that got this interview, during the Zoom call, Mark was asking these questions and he just made James Daniels look ignorant. And that's not really what James Daniels is. And so I kind of apologize for my tweet. I was a little taken aback by it, and I instantly put that out. I probably shouldn't have phrased it that way, but it is incumbent on every organization to really value the importance of communication. I mean, all three of us know that. We're all in that business, and we know that communication is generally the lifeblood of any organization, and that you've got to communicate with the external public in an effective way, and then with the internal staff in a very, very effective way. That's the players, that's the employees, and so forth. And it just seems like the Chicago Bears fail at both of those, given what we have seen result-wise and seen and heard with our eyes and ears.
And Alyssa, I can't believe I haven't asked you this, but you're a Michigan fan, right?
I am.
So I don't know how I have failed our listeners. I have failed this network by not asking what would be your feelings if Jim Harbaugh left Michigan but went to the Bears. Like what would be going on in your head there? Because he's I don't know, Michigan's probably never going to get another coach quite like him, or at least take them to the point they got to, at least not in the near future. But then again, he could be the guy who gets the Bears to the Super Bowl at some point. What dynamic? Is there an angel on one shoulder, devil on the other? What's going on there?
Yeah, there is, because they're my two top teams. Obviously, the Bears being number one and Michigan's number two. But I was having this conversation on other podcasts that I do for USA Today. And the only way that I want Jim Harbaugh leaving Michigan is if he comes to the Bears. Like, that's the only reason. Like, I could forgive that. But if he goes to, like, the Raiders or something, I'm going to be pissed off. So, I mean, it is like an angel on one and devil on the other. But because I put the Bears higher, and I think that, and it's weird to say this, but because I think the Bears have a better chance of winning a Super Bowl than Michigan has of winning a national championship when you look at the SEC and the talent. You know, obviously, we'll see, because Michigan had a successful season this year, so you're starting to see some more of those 4 or 5-star recruits, you know, committing to the team. And so, I don't know, maybe things change in a while, but I think that was maybe the closest Michigan is going to get in a while. So, I mean, again, if Harbaugh comes to the Bears, that's the only way I want him leaving Michigan, not leaving.
Well, what about Matt Nagy going to Michigan?
Oh, dear God. Don't do that to me.
That made me cringe. I'm not even a Michigan fan.
I think, though, he could be a good college coach, because he's got kind of had, rah-rah attitude, but maybe that's not a good thing. After listening to James Daniels kind of botch that response to that question.
No, I think he could be a successful college coach. I don't know if he's going to go right into a Michigan-style job. I believe he went to the University of Delaware. I don't know what their coaching status is like, but I could see him taking over at one of those small Division I schools, making a name for himself, and then maybe trying to, lily pad that into another job, so to speak. So that could be his route. I thought as soon as this Harbaugh stuff came out, I thought, oh man, he's doing the James Franklin, but on a much bigger scale, where his agent leaks out that James Franklin's connected to every job ever and every year, so he gets an extension or he gets a raise. And so, forever James Franklin's connected to the USC job, or he's connected to this job or that job, and then Penn State's like, oh wait, here's $100 million. And so I think that Harbaugh sees this some of the money being shelled out by USC, by some of these big programs going out and poaching coaches, and whatever Brian Kelly's getting paid to coach at LSU, and so he's so good. Yeah, Mel Tucker getting paid $95 million or whatever it is. Yeah. So. Yeah, so and that makes Bears fans' head explode, given to what the defense in Chicago looked like whenever Mel Tucker was in charge of it. But it's one of those things where it's like, go ahead and leak out that I'm interested in going to the NFL. Leak out, because I don't think Harbaugh would want it leaked out that he's interested in another college job, because I don't think, first of all, no one would believe that, because I think that it's Michigan or bust for Harbaugh for the most part. But so he said, go ahead and leak out that I'm interested in maybe coaching in the NFL again. So you leak that out, and then Michigan comes back and says, whoa, how's a 10-year extension for $120 million sound? Like, oh, okay, now we're talking business. So I think this was kind of a ploy for Jim Harbaugh the entire time. Who's to say, though? He is an eccentric fella. He could be coaching the Jaguars by next year. Wouldn't that be fitting? He never beat Urban Meyer at Ohio State, so he's just going to take his job in Jacksonville.
Or he can come to Chicago and coach Justin Fields, who he knows he helped succeed, right? He put him in a good position to succeed. Obviously on the other sideline, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it would be a great hire. I just don't think it's one of those pie in the sky things where it's nice to talk about, but you
ain't gonna happen.
You never think. I remember way back when, I think it was before maybe it was like as Lovie Smith was about to leave, or maybe it was during Lovie's tenure where it was like the last 2 or 3 years where people were thought that he might get fired or they should move on from him. Every offseason, Bill Cowher's name got thrown out as far as like, could Cowher come coach for the Bears? Would Cowher come coach for the Bears? Now, it's just one of those pie in the sky things that's really nice to talk about, but you don't know if it's ever actually going to happen. And obviously that didn't, and I don't think this will either. So that being said, I know we haven't gotten into a real detailed, evaluation of this, but who are the names that jump out to you guys? Aldo, I'll start with you. As far as throw me a name of the GM or throw me a name of a head coach you think like, man, wouldn't be angry at all if that guy was the new GM or head coach of the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I think you got to look at the guys at Indianapolis. Those two names, Dodds and Morocco Brown, are two very, very intriguing candidates. And it's always hard for us people to make evaluations of these candidates because we haven't talked to them. And so our opinion is based on the results of their team and also based on seeing them interviewed. And I've seen some interviews with both of those guys. Both are just so impressive. And so I'd love that kind of progressive thinking. And so the question then would be, well, then are you basically bringing in another Ryan Pace? I don't think so. But that is the gamble. But from the coaching standpoint, you know what? I'm struggling with a name from the coaching standpoint. There just isn't anybody out of all that long list. Let me get that scroll that I stole from BearsWire.com. All of these names are compiled by Alyssa on BearsWire.com. Just great job there. But Todd Bowles, perhaps. But then I'm afraid that if you bring in a guy whose expertise is defense, then what are you doing with Justin Fields? Are you going to bring in an offensive coordinator and then they have success and then he's gone and so forth? So would it be nice to have an offensive-minded coach? Nathaniel Hackett is somebody that I don't like. Byron Leftwich is someone who is an intriguing candidate, but is he a product of Tom Brady? It's a tough call. So from a coach's standpoint, I'm still struggling with that. But from a GM standpoint, I'm sold on either Dodds or Brown from the Colts.
What about you, Alyssa?
Yeah, that GM candidate list is very impressive. I think it's like I feel more confident about that than head coach, and exactly the guys that Aldo was mentioning up there in Indianapolis is Ed Dodds and Morocco Brown. I mean, there's someone they work with Chris Ballard. They're both, essentially like right hand men to him. So they have a lot of experience kind of seeing how the job's done. And a big part of the success of that team, especially Morocco Brown, someone who has a really good eye for talent. And you could say, I agree that obviously Dodds does as well. And kind of like to go off what Aldo was saying about head coach. I mean, you kind of look at some of these right now, and I mean, the two that really stick out would probably be Brian Flores. I think he's probably at the top of my list if I have to pick, and Brian Dable. Again, whether or not, like, my concern with Brian Flores would just be, can he get the right staff in place, right? Can he keep an offensive coordinator? Can he hire the right people? Because developing Justin Fields should be a main priority, obviously. But Brian, I just still can't believe that the Dolphins fired him, because he's someone where we talk about, you want a coach that's going to be tough and hold people accountable. And I think Brian Flores is that guy. So, I mean, sign me up for that. But again, the big thing when he gets in the room, which I think he's interviewing on Saturday or sometime this weekend, he needs to be able to have a staff ready. Like, so who are you going to bring? Like, you have to have a plan for Justin Fields. So that's what I would be most concerned with. I want to make sure, because people talk about Tua and him like not having the success, but I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I don't think they're the same quarterback, right? I think Fields has a much higher ceiling. So I mean, just the idea of like Flores and Fields, and especially if he gets the right coaches in place, that could be really fun and exciting. And Brian Dable, someone who has success developing a quarterback. You look at what Josh Allen was before, when everyone thought he was going to be a bust, and look at what has happened now. And even to kind of look at what Dable did with the Bills offense, he likes to run the football like Matt Nagy, so he's not going to be, allergic to running the ball when he needs to and developing Fields. So, but again, with a first time head coach in Dable, it's going to be about the staff that he assembles. So, and there is the personal connection too with the Bears. So, I mean, we'll see, but I'd probably say Flores, and then Dable would be my top two coaches at this point.
John, Omar Khan has been added to that list. You're in the Pittsburgh area. What do you hear about him?
I love Omar Khan, and he's 1, and Dodds is 1A. Those are my two, Dodds and Omar Khan. Omar Khan has been with the Pittsburgh Steelers since 2001. He's been there for over 20 years, and he's been promoted throughout that entire time. Football administration coordinator, director of football administration, vice president of football and business administration. In a perfect world, in an absolutely, we'll call it Narnia or whatever you want to call it, Omar Khan would be the new Ted Phillips, because he is perfect for that. And I just feel like Omar Khan has been learning from this stable franchise for 2 decades, learning under Kevin Colbert, who has been as stable as it gets as far as a GM, with an ownership group as stable as it gets with the Rooney family, also family owned. The Bears are family owned. So he could bring some of that culture over to Chicago to say, this is what we should be doing. This is what you should have been doing for the last 40 years. This is how we've been doing things in Pittsburgh. So that would be a real nice breath of fresh air. Now, Colbert is supposedly retiring after this year. So I don't know if Khan would just be using this as leverage with the Steelers to say, hey, I might leave. You might want to give me this GM job and give me a real nice bonus to go along with it. I mean, everything is leverage. If you have other offers, then someone's going to pay more to keep you. So just like we were talking about with Harbaugh. So I don't know if Omar Khan would want to even leave Pittsburgh if he has the potential to be the general manager there, or if they want to elevate him to another position. So I don't know how realistic it might be, but I think that he would be a great candidate. Dodds seems like a no-nonsense guy. I think I was reading about a time that he was interviewing, or a conversation he was having, where it's like he wasn't here to win wild card games. Like he was upset that they only made the wild card round, or he wasn't there, and all this other stuff. So he's a guy that absolutely wants to win. So those are my 1 and 1A candidates for GM. I just saw a question in the chat room: what leverage Nagy can use? I don't know. That's, you know what, we'll have to. I'm gonna have to noodle that a little bit. But as far as head coaches go, the only thing that does concern me about Flores is it was such a shock that he was fired. So what actually was going on there? What was the relationship? Like there's rumors that he and Tua weren't getting along, and maybe him and the GM weren't getting along, or maybe he and the head coaching staff weren't getting along, or whatever it was, whatever the dynamic was. I want to know, because he was doing a good job when it comes to the tangible results of wins and losses. But what actually went on? Is he going to be tough to work with? And so we'll see. Plus, he's kind of more of a defensive mind. And Alyssa, much like you said, make sure you have the right staff to actually facilitate a young quarterback. And like I've been saying this forever, I don't think you need to have an offensive person. I think you just need to have a really good, strong head coach who knows how to build a staff. So I do like Todd Bowles. I think that no one was going to succeed with that roster in New York when he was there. I think his first year they still won 10 games, and he does have a good philosophy of being able to cater his game plan to specific opponents. So I wouldn't hate that. But there's question marks, much like you were saying, Aldo. There's question marks with a lot of these guys. Is Nathaniel Hackett a product of LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers? Is Byron Leftwich a hot name because of Tom Brady? Although Bruce Arians speaks very, very highly of Byron Leftwich, as far as he says Byron kind of takes care of everything. I think he was quoted in saying Byron is the guy, and he takes care of the. Yeah. So I could see why he would say that, because he wants this guy to get a head coach job. That's like that one guy you put on or the one person you put on your reference list that is just going to just exaggerate everything you've ever done. It's like, oh yeah, use that person as a reference. They'll be great. So I can see Bruce Arians sticking up for his guy like that. But I'm not blown away by any of the candidates where I gotta say they have to go get that guy. But I think that there's strengths to a lot of them. I think you have to get the GM hired first, though. I agree with Aaron Lemming, who was on what sounds like 3 hours ago. But I agree with him. Like the process should be hire the GM and don't say, hey, we hired a coach. You're the GM. Make it work. I think the GM should have at least be on a phone call or should at least be in those discussions to see who his head coach is going to be, because he's going to be the one constructing the roster. He wants to know what the strengths of his head coach are and what his coach's philosophy is going to be. So if the head coach runs a 4-3 defense and you bring in the GM, it's just like, oh, I really wish we could run a 3-4 because that's what we have. And that's what I kind of want is going to go after in the draft. I think you gotta have the GM on those conversations. So not blown away by anyone.
Yeah, if I can add regarding Brian Flores, the Miami Herald's sports columnist Barry Jackson wrote a really good column on Tuesday, and he said that there were plenty of players who liked and admired Flores, but his arrogance and bristling personality rubbed some players the wrong way. A close associate of multiple young Dolphins said the players complained to him about that. He doesn't understand dealing with men. He's not approachable. Here's an example. There was a young player who came into Flores' office, and Flores immediately told him, "Don't come to my office talking about playing time." That player had no such intentions to talk about playing time. And so that's the kind of behavior from Flores that got him a bad rep down in Miami and may have led to his firing, because apparently he was behaving that way too with his general manager.
You know what's interesting about that, Aldo, is that I think there's been similar opinions or maybe thought process around a lot of those guys that come from the Bill Belichick tree. Yeah, Belichick does come off as that sometimes, but he also has won a ton of Super Bowls and he's been around the NFL forever. The same things could have been said about Matt Patricia whenever he was with Detroit. The same thing could be said about Joe Judge, who just got fired from New York, where he was obviously quite arrogant and to the point where it was laughable in some of his press conferences. And the same thing coming out about Flores now, about the hard to deal with maybe. And now I have no problem with someone being abrasive and maybe shaking up the mold. But there's a difference between a good shakeup and then just stonewalling people and not understanding the makeup of a team. So I have a little bit. That's where I have a little bit of my apprehension there. He got results with Miami. They didn't win a championship or anything, but they did win games they probably shouldn't have won, especially whenever they were supposedly tanking last year, and they won a lot more games than they thought that they were going to win. So he does have the ability to win football games. Does that translate into sustainable success for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years? I don't know. So I hope that this crew is doing their due diligence around that, because you don't want a guy that's going to come in and all of a sudden the players hate him. And I'm not saying the players have to be in love with him, much like they don't have to be like the Matt Nagy type where it's just like, buddy, let's go grab beers with the coach. But it also needs to be a guy where you can go to. Like I keep bringing Mike Tomlin up, and I don't mean to, but he's just the first name that pops into my head. Where it's just like, I don't think if you walk over to Mike Tomlin's office, he's going to say, "Don't bring up playing time." He's going to listen to you at least. He's going to give you a raw, genuine, unfiltered answer about a lot of things, but he's at least going to listen to you first. Yes. So I think I think that's a big thing. So I hope that they do their due diligence on this. I think Bill Polian's probably there more for the GM search than he is for the head coach. Now I don't know. Maybe he's a big part of the head coach as well. But I think that they need to do a lot of background on these people to make sure that they get a guy who's going to change the culture, but not change the culture like Joe Judge did, where it's you're going on the defensive all the time, talking about it's not a clown show franchise, and then you just embarrass the hell out of your franchise when you can't win any games, and you're talking about how people are calling you up saying, "We wish we were still playing with the Giants." He's like former players are really calling him and saying, "I wish I still played for the Giants," looking at how bad that franchise is run. You're like, "Oh man, Coach Judge, I wish I wouldn't have taken more money, and I wish I was playing for your crappy team." That could not have happened. Like that did not happen. Like let's be real. What players are going to be like? I gotta call up Coach Judge and just let him know that I regret my bigger contract with a different team whenever they're flourishing in New York. So I think that there needs to be a lot of research that goes beyond scheme philosophy. I think personality plays a big part in this, much like that it wasn't at Matt Nagy that he ended up doing like a media tryout or something like that, and they liked it so much that was a big reason why. Or didn't the Bears do like mock interviews with some of their candidates at some point? Did I remember that correctly?
Phil Emery was
yeah.
During that period. They were when they were looking for somebody, they were asked to do mock press conferences, and Bill Arians kind of scoffed at that. Why the hell am I going to do that? So that didn't endear him with McCaskey and so forth. So yeah, that's happened. Matthew asked, what about Doug Peterson? What do you guys think about that name?
Go ahead, Alyssa. I'll let you go first.
If you were telling me Doug Peterson or like Eric Bieniemy, we're talking, Andy Reid coaching tree, I would feel more comfortable with Peterson because, he has had success. He has won a Super Bowl and he's shown, he got some pretty good years out of Carson Wentz, and now kind of look at him now. And somehow the Colts were able to trade for him. Still don't understand that, but so I would, I think I would take Peterson probably over someone like Eric Bieniemy, which it's interesting that surprised that they haven't put in an interview request for him. I don't know if I've seen, there might be one team that has for Bieniemy. So yeah, but I'm not gonna lie, Andy Reid coaching tree kind of scares me. Obviously, with coming off Matt Nagy, still got PTSD from that. But someone like Peterson, it would be like a safe hire, I think. Because he has had coaching experience. He's had success. Heck, he was even hanging out at House Halder in training camp with Nagy and with Justin Fields last summer. So I wouldn't. He wouldn't be at the top of my list, but I wouldn't be like really angry about it either.
Yeah, my problem with him is that Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts are very similar quarterbacks, and Peterson did not do a good job with Jalen Hurts. So what evidence do we have that he can succeed with a quarterback with those unique skills?
Yeah, I like that he has head coaching experience. I like that he got a lot out of that Philadelphia Eagles team whenever they did make that Super Bowl run. Much like that, though, they were a flash in the pan. They ended up winning the Super Bowl, and everyone talked about, I forget which Eagles player said it, but it's like, I'd rather, have fun and win one than, like do things the New England way or something like that. I forget. It was, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but was it a lax attitude with Doug Peterson as well that does not keep players accountable and eventually gets them complacent? And nothing gets you more complacent than winning a Super Bowl. So we saw that happen in Philadelphia a little quicker. But I do like that he has head coach experience. I'm sure I don't want to keep dumping on the Andy Reid system because it has succeeded, but it succeeded with Andy Reid. And so I don't know. When we were talking about this last year, I was gung-ho about Eric Bieniemy coming to Chicago. Like if Matt Nagy was released last year. I always reserve the right to change my mind, and I'm changing my mind with that. And I'm also hesitant with Doug Peterson. I know that he did get a good amount of production out of Carson Wentz, but I don't think Carson Wentz and Justin Fields are the same kind of quarterback. The problem with a lot of these coaching candidates is I like some aspects from Doug Peterson. I like some aspects from these other guys. If I could Frankenstein them, I would. But they every one of them. And the reason that, they all come with question marks, every one of them. Unless you're going to go out and you're going to get like Sean Payton comes to Chicago. That's the only one that you're not going to have question marks about for the most part. Like Jim Harbaugh probably has the least of the question marks with other things. So every one of these guys is going to be a risk at some point. Every one of these guys is going to be who is a first-time head coach or retread is going to have a challenge. So I'm not going to say that they have to get one guy or the other because as much like our friend Tyler Ellis always says, just get lucky once, please. Just get lucky once.
Exactly. I think we lost Alyssa because her headphones died and stuff. So we'll see if she can join us back. But please go ahead.
She's not used to these 2.5 hour shows.
This is awesome, man.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, Aldo, how will you remember? Because I've answered this probably 2 or 3 times on different shows, but how will you remember this era? Because I remember it as I equated it to fool's gold. It was, we were given all of this hope in 2018, and I equated it to buying a really nice gold ring, and then it starts fading, and then you take it off, and there's an ugly green ring around your finger, and you realize you were sold a fake. And basically what that comes down to is we thought this window of opportunity was going to be open from 2018 to whenever. We thought Matt Nagy was going to take the offense to the next level. We thought that Mitch Trubisky was going to be a franchise quarterback. We thought the defense was going to, stay at that top level, even though they were aging. And this team overachieved in 2018, and then they were primed for Super Bowl runs in 2019, 2020, 2021. It just never happened. So how will you remember this?
Yeah, it's when you're building a football team, you need a lot of luck. And Ryan Pace started to get a lot of luck when he brought in certain people that allowed the Chicago Bears defense to be one of the best defenses in Bears single season Bears history. That 2018 defense was winning football games for the Chicago Bears, much like Buddy Ryan's 1985 Chicago Bears were. So that was fantastic. And then the luck ran out when Vic Fangio got the job that he deserved. He deserved to become a head coach. And all of a sudden, the changes with bringing in Chuck Pagano and so forth, that destroyed the mojo that the defense had. And then age is starting to creep in with the defense. And so we had that one opportunity in 2018. And John, I'm not ashamed to say it. When that double doink happened, I had tears in my eyes because I sensed it. I sensed it that this was it. This was the one opportunity. Having followed this team for decades and decades, I know that once you get that one opportunity that you've got a team that can really compete for a Super Bowl championship, for a win, you can't screw it up because next year is not promised. And we all went into 2019 with high hopes and so forth. But in reality, hindsight being 2020, we knew it wasn't going to be quite the same because the defense wasn't going to be the same. And there were some players missing and so forth. So I'm going to look back at this era as that one shot. We had that one shot. And thanks to Cody Parkey, we double doinked out of an opportunity to win a championship.
And I saw this in the chat room and I couldn't agree more. It's like sad that we have to think this way. And it's true because the Bears throughout the couple of decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, they before last year only made consecutive playoffs in twice from I think they did it in the early 90s and then they did it in the mid 2000s. This team just normally doesn't make consecutive playoff appearances. Now last year they did because they had to add a playoff spot for them. They got the number 7 seed and got completely demolished. I'll say this again. They made the playoffs, but they weren't a playoff team. So we are programmed to say there's always going to be this one flash in the pan year that happens every 5 to 7 years. And you better hope that it's a year like 2006 when they go to the Super Bowl and maybe you got a chance. And I think 2018 was our 2006 team where it's just like they gotta make hay now because we're not sure this is sustainable. The defense played out of its mind and carried the offense much like it did in 2006. But he's like, this is when you're on that ride, you got to make it count because the next 2 years are not guaranteed, and they weren't. And so that's why I always say that the Matt Nagy era and the Ryan Pace era was actually a little bit more frustrating than maybe even the Trestman and Fox years, because we knew the Trestman teams were going to be bad. We knew the John Fox teams were bad. We knew what they were. We had a lot of false hope for the 2019, 2020, and 2021 Bears, because maybe not the 2021, but at least the 2019 and 2020 Bears, because we saw what happened in 2018. And all of a sudden our expectations were through the roof. Man, if they were this good in Matt Nagy's first year in 2018, imagine what they're going to do the second year with Trubisky having another year in the system, Nagy getting another year of experience, Pace getting to put another year of roster construction together. Oh my God. I mean, we were excited. I was excited. I was pumped up, but it just never came to fruition. It just never happened. And now you're hoping that you can reload and you can get a regime in there that can bring sustainability. And that's hard to think about with this team because I can't even imagine having a team that makes the playoffs 3 years in a row, like an actual contender that goes, back to back playoff appearances. Can you imagine that, Aldo? You've been a fan longer than I have.
I I'm always going to be hopeful that it can happen, and it can. I mean, lightning can strike, and Bill Polian can maybe deliver two outstanding candidates for the GM and coaching job. And get this, John, and Alyssa's back with us, so I'd love to get her opinion on this. What would have happened back in 2018 when Ryan Pace was looking for a new head coach had he hired Sean McVay? I mean, that would have changed everything. Ryan Pace would still have a job. He'd be collaborating with Sean McVay, not Matt Nagy, Sean McVay. That would have been such a good pairing. Leonard Floyd would still be playing for the Chicago Bears, I bet, and wrecking havoc. So they're just, hindsight 2020, but I was I was that fun. Look at that big gallon of water.
It's a long show. All right.
Clearly my AirPods died. Scrambling around.
I'm surprised he hasn't run to the washroom like 2 or 3 times, because I see him taking a swing.
Play to win. But
what do you think about Sean McVay? Do you think that was maybe the worst thing that happened in Pace and not hiring somebody like that?
Well, it comes down to the fact that we've talked about this. Ryan Pace is really good in rounds 4 through 6 in the NFL draft, but the problem is he whiffed on the two most important things that you have to get right, and that's the head coach and the quarterback. So if he does hire McVay, do they still go out and get Trubisky? I guess they brought him in with Fox, but right. Is Mitch Trubisky still with the team? Does he turn into something with Sean McVay? I have my doubts. Maybe because McVay couldn't make it work with Jared Goff, so they had to go out and get Matt Stafford. Maybe Matt Stafford's playing for the Chicago Bears at this point. I doubt it. But if you get the coach right, then who knows what actually would have happened? And I'm someone that always does appreciate the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, because I love hypotheticals. I love going down those roads. But
it's fun.
Yeah, but I think he's probably still employed if he hires Sean McVay. But Alyssa, what do you think?
Yeah, and you mentioned how he didn't succeed with Jared Goff, but then I kind of think of, they made it to the Super Bowl with Jared Goff, and that's when they had a talented roster. And if there was any year where the Bears could have won a Super Bowl, it would have been 2018. So I'm curious, if they had hired McVay, maybe he gets the most that he can out of Mitchell Trubisky, or maybe Trubisky's, maybe he's solid for another couple years. Maybe that kind of just changes the whole path of the quarterback position here in Chicago. Not that he was great by any means, but Sean McVay can mask a lot of weaknesses. So I mean, that's a really interesting question. Oh man, what could
if they go to the Super Bowl? If they go to the Super Bowl in 2018, do you think that Mitch's leash was a lot longer then?
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So it maybe shrunk every year.
Yeah, maybe he does. Maybe they pick up that 5th-year option, or they do whatever maybe they franchise. I don't know. But that's neither here nor there. 2022 is coming up. So I mean, I know that as Bears fans, we love to bring up our misery, and we like to work through that because we harbor so much of it. There's just so much of that in there. But I think that moving forward, is there? And I'll ask this last question to go around the horn, and Alyssa, I'll start with you. Is there reason to be hopeful? I'm basically going to ask you the last question you asked me in our B55 segment, which once again felt like it was last year. Is there a reason to be hopeful? And what are those reasons?
It was funny. I was asked this question too on another podcast I do, and I had one simple answer, and it was Justin Fields. I mean, at this point, we're hoping that he is a star talent, and again, you got to get the right people in place, because clearly Matt Nagy did not do a good job at all. So the hope, and there's hope with Justin Fields. I don't think I'm trying to look, and there's a lot of young talent also on this roster too, when you look around. So it's about getting the right people in place to kind of get the most out of them. On defense, obviously Roquan and Jalen, and on offense, obviously you have Fields, you have Mooney, Montgomery, Khalil Herbert. Hopefully you could get something out of Cole Kmet. At this point, though, because we really don't know what's going to happen, other than they've already fired Pace and Nagy. So that's the one. We don't know who they're going to bring in to replace them. Is it going to be better? Is it going to be worse? So, at this point, the only thing I'm really clinging to is Justin Fields, and hoping that they do get the right people in place to really, maximize his talents, and hopefully he can become the quarterback that I know you, John and Aldo, like we haven't had that quarterback. So, I mean, that's probably the only thing. I mean, I don't have a lot of hope. Like, I mean, like we've been down this road a lot. So
yeah,
I'm going to stick with Fields.
Yeah, clearly Fields is a great reason to have hope for this franchise. And I think another reason is that, you're almost coming into the situation, the GM and the head coach, with almost a clean slate. Yeah, you've got a couple of contracts that are going to linger for a while and are going to be a problem. Ryan Pace didn't do the best job of managing the cap. And so there's going to have to be some magic done there. But, there's only like 30 players signed for next season. And so you're coming into a situation where you should have free reign to do what you want. You should have a clear slate of rebuilding the roster. You should have 2 or 3 years to build a winning team. And so those things are appealing, should be very appealing to very qualified GMs and coaches. And when you look also at the history of this franchise, people are going to come to Chicago knowing that if you win here, you're going to be a celebrity. You're going to make tons of money. Your reputation is going to glow forever. They're going to make statues out of you and so forth. So because of that, despite the fact that we've got kind of, clown show or the owners of a diner over at Alice Law calling shots, but at least, if they bring in qualified people, I am fairly certain that their meddling is going to be at a point where it should not really impact football operations to a terrible degree. They might nix the acquisition of an expensive player because, they've already spent and lost so much on certain players. They might interfere that way, but for the most part, I don't think they're going to interfere. So I have hope that, with this clean slate, that we can start again and hopefully get some wins.
And to your point, Aldo, if you win in Chicago, look what it did for Mike Ditka. I know that he played for the Bears, but also like you win a Super Bowl in Chicago, people start dressing up as you for Halloween. They start putting on vests and they wear mustaches and sunglasses. They make SNL skits about you. You are in folklore. Yeah. You are forever ingrained in sports history because you won a Super Bowl with the Chicago Bears. That's what it can do for you. So I hope these candidates, both GM and head coach, understand that and they take that to heart, because if you win here, it is much bigger than winning in most other cities, because this fan base is starved for a winner. I know the Bulls are bringing a lot of excitement to the fans. I know the Cubs and White Sox really, there are a lot of big people that are passionate about baseball. But I think we would all agree that if you win a Super Bowl with the Chicago Bears, that trumps anything else that could happen in this city as far sports-wise, because this fan base, this city, this team is starved for success. And the person that can bring that to them is going to be forever immortalized. And so I hope that people understand that whenever they're applying for this job or they get this job or what have you. So with that being said, let's go around the horn with some final thoughts. Aldo, I'm going to start with you and just some parting words for the show, the season, anything else that's upcoming, future events. What do you got going on?
Well, all I want to say is that I've been really, really fortunate to work with very talented and knowledgeable people, and you two are like right at the top. It's been such a joy being associated with you guys on Buffone 55. The passion, the knowledge, the shows that you guys produce week after week after week. I'm just in awe of it, and so it's so lucky that it's all a part of the Barroom Network. And I can't wait. I hope we can do this again next season, and if so, I can't wait for that to start. We all need a little bit of a break, right? but once everything is in motion, I can't wait for it to start. We'll have new ideas and new ways to do things, because we're always looking to continue continuously improve. But man, this past season has been the best of the 5 Buffone 55 seasons, and it's just a tribute to the hard work that both of you have put into it week after week after week. And so I thank you very, very much for all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank you too. I mean, I love doing this every week. It is just a highlight of my week because it feels like a therapy session, right? We come together, and because this team, it can take a lot out of you, like whether you're watching as a fan or you're covering it. So I mean, at least I get paid to watch this team, but like coming on here and having our therapy sessions and just kind of like hashing it out, it's always a highlight of my week. I mean, you two are some of the best in the game, and it's just one of my favorite things to do. And thanks to all of our viewers and listeners, because you guys are just amazing. Thank you so much for your continued support. It's awesome, and I can't wait for next season. It's going to be great. And we have a busy off season. I mean, we're going to take a little break here, but and while you're doing that, because I've just been working nonstop, make sure you go to Bears Wire. I got the running list of head coach and GM candidates. We're doing profiles on them and we're going to be on top of everything as it happens. So make sure you check it out at bearswire.com, and just thank you guys. It's been awesome.
There you go.
And before we sign off, I just want to talk to our viewers and our listeners real quick. This show wraps up our 5th season here on Buffone 55. And it's incredible that some of you still haven't found anything better to do in 5 years. But seriously, I know that we aren't on national TV or national radio, but it humbles the hell out of me every time I see people in the chat room or people commenting on the show, or just knowing that someone is actually listening. So thank you so much. You get me through these rough Bears seasons, and I hope we have helped you as well. And I also want to thank everyone at the Barroom, specifically Aldo Gandia and Alyssa Barbieri. You honestly could not ask for better people to work with. They're my friends. I care a lot about them, and doing a show with people you care for is about as good as it gets. And finally, I have to thank my Uncle Doug, who I hope is listening to this show while relaxing on a big couch up in heaven. But if you know Doug, you know he's probably not relaxing right now with the Bears being in flux. But without him, I'm not doing this show. I'm not a Bears fan. I don't get to meet anyone at the bar room. I don't get to interact with any of you listening right now. I don't stay in the media industry like I did. I simply don't become the person I am right now. And I always say, I hope to carry a fraction of the passion that he had into this podcast. And that's why I try to give you my best every second of every show. He deserves that effort, and you deserve that effort. So once again, thank you so much for being a part of this show. And we'll see you next time on Buffone 55.